I emptied out every single penny of my retirement account, exactly $86,000, to hand over to my only son when he called me sobbing that his family was about to lose everything. But when I drove over to his house with a hot meal to comfort them, my own flesh and blood blocked the front door with both arms. His eyes were completely dead, darting around like a trapped rat. And right at that moment, a woman sobbed from the pitch-black darkness of the living room inside, begging, "Please do not leave me here." My name is Calvin Jefferson. I am 62 years old, and I live in a quiet, working-class suburb just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. For 35 long years, I worked as a railway dispatcher. I am a black man who spent the best decades of his life working the graveyard shifts down in the rail yards. I spent my nights breathing in heavy diesel fumes, getting soaked to the bone in the freezing winter rain, and drinking burnt coffee just to stay awake so the freight trains would stay on the tracks. I remember nights when the frost was so thick on the metal rails that my bare hands would stick to the heavy steel levers. I remember missing high school basketball games and Sunday dinners because a train broke down on the main line and I had to work a double shift. Every time I felt like quitting, every time my lower back seized up and my knees throbbed with severe arthritis, I would look at a crumpled photograph in my wallet. I did not work those grueling hours for glory, and I certainly did not do it for my own comfort. I did it to give my only son, Andre, the life I never had the chance to live. My wife passed away 10 years ago. Her name was Josephine. When she died, it felt like the sun went out in my world forever. We had built a life together, saving penny by penny, and when the Lord called her home, she left Andre as my only blood left in this world. From that day forward, every drop of sweat that fell from my brow was for him. I paid his college tuition in full, so he would not have to start his adult life buried under a mountain of debt. I helped him put a down payment on his first car. I wanted him to wear a tailored suit to work, to sit in a comfortable air-conditioned office, and to never know the kind of back-breaking manual labor that leaves your joints screaming in agony every single morning. And when he met Chloe, I was absolutely overjoyed. Chloe is a sweet white woman from a very good family, kind-hearted, educated, and gentle. When Andre married Chloe, I felt like my life mission was finally complete. I remember standing in the back of that beautiful church, watching my son in his tuxedo, looking at his beautiful bride. Her family welcomed him with open arms. They bought a gorgeous house in a safe, quiet suburb. Soon after, they blessed me with my brilliant grandson, Leo. To me, Andre had achieved the perfect American dream. The Jefferson family line was secure, and I trusted my son with my very life. I would have gladly stepped in front of a moving freight train for that boy. But that absolute trust was turned into a weapon against me on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting on my front porch enjoying the quiet peace of my retirement when my phone suddenly rang. It was Andre. The moment I answered the call, I knew something was terribly, horribly wrong. He was not just crying, he was hyperventilating, gasping for air like a man who was drowning underwater. I jumped out of my chair, my heart immediately pounding heavily against my ribs. I asked him what was wrong, begging him to slow down and speak clearly to me. Through his heavy sobs, Andre told me a story that chilled me straight to the bone. He said he had lost his corporate job several months ago and had been hiding it from everyone out of deep shame. He was speaking so fast the words were blending together in panic. He said, "Dad, I failed. I lost everything." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. He told me the bank had been sending active foreclosure notices for months, threatening to auction off their house by the end of the week. He said he had been too proud to ask for help, hoping he could find another executive job in time, but the deadline had officially passed. They were going to be thrown out on the street, but that was not even the worst part. Andre's voice cracked violently as he started talking about Chloe, and the panic in his voice turned into sheer terror. He said the immense stress of their secret financial ruin had completely broken her mind. He described a severe, terrifying mental breakdown. He claimed she was hallucinating, refusing to eat food, screaming at the walls, and actively threatening to harm herself and little Leo. He told me the doctors said she needed immediate intensive inpatient psychiatric treatment at a private facility. But because he had lost his job, they had no health insurance left. He said the facility required a massive out-of-pocket payment up front today, or they would not admit her to save her life. He was crying so hard he could barely form the syllables. He told me he was going to lose his wife, lose his son, and lose his home all at the exact same time. He said he needed exactly $86,000 to save his family from complete destruction. When a father hears his child crying out in absolute agony, reason and logic fly right out the window. You do not ask for legal paperwork. You do not ask for proof or documentation. Your only instinct is to protect your blood. I told him to hold on, to stay strong, and that his father was going to fix it right now. I grabbed my truck keys, threw on my jacket, and drove straight to my bank. My rough hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, picturing sweet Chloe, suffering in the dark, picturing my little grandson Leo scared and confused in a house about to be seized by ruthless bankers. I did not care about my retirement fund. I did not care about the years of breathing in diesel fumes or the nights I spent freezing in the rail yard. None of that money mattered if my family was broken and bleeding. I walked into the bank lobby, which was quiet, smelling of lemon polish and cold air conditioning. It was a stark contrast to the grease and sweat of my entire working life. I sat down at the desk of a personal banker named Sarah, a young woman who knew me from my weekly visits. I told her I needed to liquidate my 401k and my entire life savings immediately. Sarah looked at my computer screen and then looked at me with deep concern. She asked me what the emergency was. When I quickly explained the desperate situation, she hesitated. She warned me about the heavy tax penalties for withdrawing the entire amount at once. She even gently leaned forward and asked if I was absolutely sure I was not being scammed, mentioning that elder financial abuse often starts with frantic, emotional phone calls from family members. Her questions angered me. I felt insulted that she would question the integrity of my boy. I looked her dead in the eye and told her this was not a scam, this was my flesh and blood. I told her my son was facing a tragedy, and I was not going to let him fall. Seeing the fierce, uncompromising determination in my face, she finally nodded and began typing on her keyboard. I sat there and watched the computer monitor. I watched 35 years of my life, 35 years of missed holidays, exhausted mornings, and aching bones get wiped out in a matter of seconds. I signed the heavy stack of authorization forms without a single second thought. The banker confirmed the wire transfer had been officially initiated and that exactly $86,000 was being sent directly into Andre's bank account. When the final receipt printed, I folded it neatly and put it in my front pocket. I had exactly $1,000 left to my name in the whole world. I was essentially broke, a 62-year-old man starting over from nothing. But as I walked out of those heavy glass doors, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride and relief. I had done my job as a father. I had saved my son. The money was gone, but my family was going to survive. The moment the wire transfer cleared, the first massive crisis in my mind was resolved. But my heart still ached terribly for my daughter-in-law. I knew Chloe must be terrified and confused. I knew Andre was probably physically exhausted and starving from carrying such a heavy emotional burden for months. I wanted to look them in the eyes and tell them everything was going to be all right now. So I stopped by a local family diner on my way to their neighborhood. I bought a large container of homemade chicken noodle soup, some fresh warm bread, and a few small toys for little Leo. The aroma of the chicken soup filled the cabin of my truck. I remembered how my late wife used to make soup for Andre whenever he had a terrible fever as a little boy. It was a simple cure, but it was made with pure love. I hoped that seeing a hot meal would bring a small smile to Chloe's tired face. I hoped that seeing her father-in-law standing there would make her feel safe and protected. I drove toward the affluent suburb where they lived. It was a beautiful neighborhood, with perfectly manicured lawns and large, pristine houses. I had always been so proud that my son lived in a place like this. I pulled my beat-up old truck into their wide paved driveway and noticed his expensive car was parked haphazardly near the garage. The house itself looked strangely ominous. In the middle of a bright, sunny afternoon, every single curtain and blind was pulled completely shut. There was no sign of life, no toys scattered on the front lawn, no sound of the television playing from inside. Just a heavy, unnatural silence hanging over the property. I grabbed the brown paper bags of hot food and walked up the steps to the heavy wooden front door. I did not know it yet, but with every step I took, I was walking straight into the most devastating and evil betrayal of my entire life. I reached out and knocked firmly on the door, expecting my son to open it with tears of gratitude running down his face. I expected to wrap my arms around him and tell him his father had his back forever. But the horrifying reality waiting on the other side of that door was about to tear my soul apart. The tires of my old Ford truck crunched softly against the pristine paved driveway of my son's house. It was one of those sprawling two-story suburban homes with a wraparound porch, pristine white siding, and perfectly trimmed hedges that made you feel like you had stepped right into the pages of a high-end lifestyle magazine. I always felt a massive swell of pride pulling up to this address. It was the physical proof that all those freezing, miserable nights out in the rail yard had actually meant something. I used to tell myself that the arthritis in my knees and the permanent ache in my lower back were the prices I gladly paid so my son could have a manicured lawn and a solid oak front door. But today the pride was completely gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating knot of anxiety sitting right at the base of my throat. The late afternoon sun was beating down hard on the Georgia asphalt, radiating heat in shimmering waves, yet an unnatural, icy chill seemed to hang over their entire property. I turned off the engine and just sat there for a second, listening to the old motor tick as it cooled. I looked at the front of the house. Every single blind was drawn tight. The heavy drapes in the large living room window, the ones Chloe absolutely loved to keep wide open to let the natural sunlight flood in, were pulled completely shut. It looked like a fortress preparing for a siege, or a tomb sealing its secrets inside. I grabbed the brown paper bags from the passenger seat. The heat from the large container of chicken noodle soup seeped through the paper, warming my calloused hands. I had tucked a few little toy train cars inside the bag for my grandson Leo, hoping they might bring a tiny spark of joy to a house that was apparently drowning in absolute sorrow. I remembered buying similar toy trains for Andre when he was just a little boy. I remembered how his eyes would light up, how he would hug my leg and promise to be a good boy forever. As I walked up the long concrete path leading to the front door, I kept running through exactly what I was going to say to the man that boy had become. I planned to look my son straight in the eye, pull his exhausted body into a tight embrace, and tell him that money comes and goes, but family is forever. I wanted to tell him that his $86,000 problem was solved, the funds were cleared, and that his father would never ever let him fall. I expected him to swing the door wide open, break down in tears of sheer relief, and collapse into my arms. I expected to walk inside and find Chloe resting quietly on the sofa, maybe pale and exhausted, but safe and comforted by our presence. I climbed the 3 wooden steps to the deep porch. My old knees popped loudly, complaining about the slight incline, a lasting gift from decades of walking on uneven gravel and heavy steel tracks. I shifted the warm bags to my left arm and raised my right hand, knocking firmly on the thick oak wood of the front door. 3 solid, rhythmic knocks. I waited. The silence that answered me felt incredibly wrong, heavy, and oppressive. In a house with an active 5-year-old boy, there is always some kind of noise. A television playing a loud cartoon tune in the background. The sound of little bare feet running across hardwood floors. Even the low, steady hum of a washing machine or a dishwasher. But there was absolutely nothing. Just the sound of my own shallow breathing and the distant buzzing chirp of a lawnmower from 2 streets over. I knocked again, this time a little harder, using the side of my fist. My heart started to pick up its pace, thudding against my ribs. A sudden, terrible flash of panic told me maybe I was too late. Maybe the ambulance had already come and gone. Maybe the stress had finally broken them completely. I pressed my ear against the warm wood of the door, straining to hear any faint sign of life inside. After what felt like an eternity of agonizing silence, I finally heard the heavy metallic scrape of the deadbolt turning. Then the bottom lock clicked sharply. The heavy brass handle turned downward slowly, almost reluctantly, as if the person on the other side was dreading what lay ahead. The door cracked open, but only a few inches, just enough for a narrow sliver of the dark interior to show and for my son to slide his upper body into the tight gap. Andre did not open the door wide to welcome his father. He did not let out a sigh of relief. Instead, he planted his left hand firmly on the brass door handle and pressed his right hand flat and hard against the door frame, physically barricading the entrance with his own body. He stood there, legs braced, blocking the threshold completely. I smiled, ready to lift the bags and hand him the warm food, but the smile died on my face the very second I truly looked at him. This was my son, the boy I had raised to be a strong, confident, and honest man. But the person standing in front of me looked like an absolute stranger holding on to a terrible secret. He was wearing a wrinkled gray t-shirt that looked like it had been slept in for days. His hair was completely unkempt, matted to his forehead, and his jaw was covered in a thick, uneven layer of stubble. But it was his eyes that alarmed me the most. They were severely bloodshot and erratic, darting left and right, looking nervously at my truck in the driveway, looking at the neighbor's empty yard, looking anywhere except directly into my face. He was sweating profusely. Thick beads of moisture were rolling down his temples and gathering at the collar of his shirt, despite the house supposedly having central air conditioning running at full blast. "Dad!" He stammered, his voice tight, breathless, and laced with an unmistakable edge of hostility. "What are you doing here?" I frowned, deeply confused by his defensive posture. "I brought you some hot food, son," I said, keeping my voice gentle and reassuring. "I brought Chloe's favorite chicken soup and some toys for Leo. I came to check on you and the family. The bank transfer went through an hour ago. The money is sitting in your account right now. You do not have to worry about the foreclosure or the medical bills anymore. I am here for you. Let me come inside so we can talk." I stepped forward naturally, expecting him to drop his arms, step aside, and let his father into the house. But Andre did not budge a single inch. Instead, he tensed his shoulders aggressively and gripped the doorframe even tighter. His knuckles were turning stark white from the immense pressure he was applying. "You cannot come in right now, Dad," he said quickly, his words rushing out in a defensive blur. "You cannot be here. You need to leave." "What do you mean I cannot come in?" I asked, feeling a sudden spike of sharp irritation mixing with my deep parental concern. "I just gave you my entire life savings, because you called me crying that your family was falling apart. I drove all the way across town to check on my daughter-in-law and my grandson. Step aside, Andre. I am coming inside to see them right now. He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously in his throat. I saw a muscle twitching violently in his jaw, a telltale sign of his rising panic. No, Dad. Listen to me, he insisted, his voice rising in a frantic pitch. You do not understand the situation. Chloe is having a terrible episode right now. It is really bad. She is completely hysterical and unpredictable. The doctors told me I have to keep the house completely dark and strictly quiet. Any sudden visitors, even you, will trigger a massive panic attack and make her condition much worse. You have to leave. I will call you later tonight when she is sedated. Just leave the food on the porch and go home. I stared at him. The boy was lying directly to my face and doing a terrible amateurish job of it. I had been a railway dispatcher for 35 years, managing chaotic train schedules, preventing catastrophic accidents, and dealing with every kind of human crisis imaginable. I knew exactly what a man looked like when he was under genuine pressure, and I knew exactly what a man looked like when he was trying to hide a massive, unforgivable mistake. Andre was practically vibrating with nervous, guilty energy. I shifted the heavy brown paper bags in my arms, preparing to drop them and demand he open the door fully. But before I could speak a single word of protest, the heavy, unnatural silence of the house was violently shattered. From deep within the pitch-black darkness of the living room behind him, a voice cried out. It was a woman's voice choked with thick tears, physical exhaustion, and absolute raw terror. It was weak, raspy, and unimaginably desperate. Please do not leave me here. The sound of Chloe's voice hit the center of my chest, like a physical blow from a sledgehammer. That was not the voice of a woman having a random paranoid hallucination. That was not the voice of someone lost in a medical delusion. It was the voice of a woman begging for her actual life. It was a direct, targeted plea for rescue. My blood ran entirely cold. Every paternal instinct inside my body instantly switched from deep nurturing concern to high-alert combat readiness. I looked from the dark, narrow gap in the doorway back to my son's face. Andre turned the color of chalk. The sweat on his forehead seemed to instantly freeze. For a fraction of a second, his carefully constructed mask of a grieving husband slipped completely, and I saw the sheer, unadulterated panic of a cornered animal flash across his wide eyes. Chloe, I called out loudly, trying to push my heavy shoulder against the thick wood of the door. Chloe, is that you? Hang on, sweetheart, I am coming in. Andre shoved back against me with surprising, violent force. He used his entire body weight to slam his shoulder into the door, pushing me forcefully back onto the concrete porch. Stop it, Dad! He hissed furiously, his face contorting into an ugly, vicious snarl I had never seen before on my child. I told you she is having a severe paranoid delusion. She does not know what she is saying. She is completely out of her mind and thinks everyone is trying to hurt her. You are making it worse by shouting. I am handling my wife. Get off my porch right now. You are hurting her, I shouted, dropping the paper bags directly onto the concrete. The large container of chicken soup burst open upon impact, spilling hot, greasy broth all across the porch floor. Open this door, Andre. Open this damn door right now, or so help me God, I will break it down. He did not answer me. His eyes were wide, cold, and utterly ruthless. He looked at me not as a loving father who had just sacrificed his entire future to save him, but as a dangerous, annoying obstacle that needed to be eliminated immediately. Without another word, he slammed the heavy oak door shut right in my face. The loud, violent crack of the wood echoing across the quiet suburban street was followed instantly by the sharp metallic sliding of the deadbolt locking firmly into place. Then the bottom lock clicked. Then the heavy security chain engaged. I stood frozen on this concrete porch, staring blankly at the polished wood of the closed door. The hot chicken soup was pooling around my heavy work boots, soaking into the worn leather. The little toy train cars I had bought for Leo were scattered sadly across the wet cement. The afternoon sun continued to beat down on my shoulders, but I felt like I had been plunged headfirst into a freezing ice bath. My mind struggled violently to process what had just happened. A father's brain tries desperately to protect him from the most horrifying conclusions. I tried to tell myself that maybe Andre was telling the truth. Maybe severe mental illness was just that ugly, terrifying, and unpredictable. Maybe my sweet daughter-in-law really was suffering from severe delusions, and my son was just overwhelmed, dangerously sleep-deprived and lashing out because he was desperately trying to hold his crumbling world together. But I could not lie to myself. You do not spend 35 years working the railways without learning how to read the undeniable signs of an impending disaster. When a massive freight train is coming down the wrong track at full speed, there is a specific kind of violent vibration in the steel rails long before you ever see the locomotive rounding the bend. You feel the deadly danger deep in your bones before your eyes can even confirm it. What I had just seen in my son's eyes was the human equivalent of that deadly vibration. The look Andre gave me right before he slammed the door was not the look of a desperate, grieving husband trying to protect his sick, fragile wife. It was the look of a criminal who had just been caught red-handed trying to hide a body. It was a look of cold, calculating malice. He was not trying to keep me out to protect Chloe from a panic attack. He was trying to keep me out to protect himself from being discovered. And then there was the voice. Her voice. Please do not leave me here. Those desperate words echoed endlessly in my ears, completely drowning out the sound of the suburban birds and the distant hum of traffic. A woman having a paranoid hallucination might scream wildly at invisible enemies. She might hide in a dark corner and cry out in pure confusion. But the specific, targeted desperation in Chloe's voice was entirely different. She knew exactly who was at the front door. She knew her father-in-law was standing right there on the other side of that wooden barrier. She was begging me directly. She was crying out to me because she knew she was in grave immediate danger, and she knew her own husband was the deadly threat. I slowly bent down and picked up the small plastic toy trains from the puddle of spilled soup. I wiped the grease off them with my thumb and slid them carefully into my jacket pocket. My hands, which had trembled with immense worry just an hour ago at the bank, were now perfectly, terrifyingly steady. The overwhelming sorrow that had consumed me all morning was burning away, replaced by a cold, sharp, and absolute clarity. I had drained my retirement account. I had handed over $86,000 of my blood, sweat, and tears. I had given up my entire financial future based on the desperate tears of my only child. But my money was not going toward saving a family from foreclosure. My money was funding a nightmare. I turned around and walked down the steps of the porch. I did not yell. I did not bang my fists against the door and demand entry. A man who yells and bangs on locked doors only warns his enemies that a serious fight is coming. He gives them time to prepare, the time to hide their sins, time to call the police and spin a complex web of lies. I was not going to give my son the advantage of knowing my next move. I walked down the pristine paved driveway and climbed back into the cab of my beat-up old Ford truck. I sat behind the steering wheel and stared intensely at the fortress of a house with its drawn blinds and locked doors. Inside that house was my innocent 5-year-old grandson. Inside that house was a sweet woman I loved, like my own daughter crying out in the dark. And inside that house was a ruthless monster wearing the familiar face of the boy I had raised. I put the keys in the ignition and turned the engine over. The old motor roared to life, vibrating powerfully beneath my boots. But I did not shift the gear into drive. I did not drive back to my empty house in the working-class suburbs to sit in my armchair and worry. I knew that if I drove away and left this alone, Chloe might not survive the weekend, and I might never see my grandson again. 35 years on the railways had taught me to recognize a collision. The real nightmare had just begun, and I was going to tear down every single wall of that house to drag the truth out into the light. I put the heavy truck in gear, but I did not head back toward my side of town. Instead, I drove exactly 2 blocks down the winding suburban road, killed the engine beneath the thick, drooping branches of an old weeping willow tree, and settled into the worn leather seat. The ornate streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across my dashboard. My heart was still hammering a furious, uneven rhythm against my ribs. I rolled the window down just a fraction to let in the humid Georgia night air. 35 years of working the graveyard shift at the rail yard meant my body was intimately accustomed to the dark. I knew exactly how to stay alert when the rest of the world was fast asleep. But tonight, sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. Every single time I blinked, I saw my son standing in that doorway. I saw the unnatural, greasy sweat pouring down his temples and the ruthless, calculating panic in his stare. I kept hearing that faint, desperate cry for help echoing from the pitch-black living room. I stared at the dashboard clock as the digital numbers glowed green, slowly and agonizingly ticking away the hours. Midnight turned into 1 in the morning, then 2, then 3. The affluent neighborhood was dead silent. It was the kind of absolute, undisturbed quiet that only serious money can buy. It was a massive contrast to the rattling freight trains, the screeching metal, and the blaring horns I was accustomed to hearing all my life. Yet that pristine suburban silence felt incredibly oppressive. It felt like a heavy, suffocating blanket, deliberately thrown over whatever ugly truth was trapped inside that beautiful 2-story house. I kept my eyes glued to the street, watching for any sign of movement, any passing police cruiser, any ambulance arriving to help a sick woman. Nothing came. The hours dragged on like thick molasses. My joints began to ache, a deep, familiar throbbing pain settling into my knees and lower back, protesting the cramped space of the truck cabin. I ignored the pain completely. Physical discomfort was absolutely nothing compared to the sharp, twisting agony tearing through my gut. I thought about the $86,000. I thought about the thousands of nights I had walked the freezing tracks, the holidays I had missed, the overtime shifts I had pulled when I was so sick I could barely stand straight. I had sacrificed my own body to build a safety net for my bloodline. And my son had taken it all in the blink of an eye with a story about foreclosure and a tragic mental breakdown. But the math in my head was no longer adding up. The pieces of his frantic story were colliding violently with the reality of what I had just witnessed on his front porch. Finally, the pitch-black sky began to turn a bruised, hazy shade of purple. Dawn was slowly breaking over the outskirts of Atlanta. The morning dew settled heavily on my windshield, blurring my view of the expensive manicured lawns lining the avenue. Automatic sprinklers hissed to life, spraying water in perfect rhythmic arcs. A young paperboy rode by on a bicycle, tossing the morning news onto pristine concrete driveways. It all looked so perfectly normal, so disgustingly routine, while a nightmare breathed quietly just down the street. At exactly 10 minutes past 7, I heard the familiar low hum of a luxury engine starting up in the distance. I grabbed a rough shop rag from the passenger seat, quickly wiped the condensation from the glass, and leaned forward, holding my breath. Andre's sleek silver sedan slowly backed out of the driveway. I watched intensely as the car turned down the avenue and glided past my hiding spot. I slouched low in my seat, pulling the brim of my baseball cap down over my eyes. He did not even look my way. He was gripping the steering wheel tight, staring straight ahead with a grim, focused, and utterly cold expression. Once his taillights disappeared completely around the far corner, I forced myself to wait another agonizing 5 minutes just to be absolutely certain he was gone and not circling back. I stepped out of the truck. The cool morning air hit my face, snapping my exhausted senses to full attention. I walked briskly down the sidewalk, keeping my head down, trying to blend in as best as a 62-year-old black man could in a neighborhood where he clearly did not reside. I reached the edge of their property and slipped quietly through the tall wooden side gate. The sprawling backyard was surrounded by a high privacy fence. Normally, a fence like that was meant to keep prying eyes out, but today it provided me with the perfect necessary cover. I crept across the damp grass, my heavy work boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. I approached the back of the house and began inspecting the windows one by one. The kitchen, the formal dining room, the guest bedroom. Every single window was locked tight from the inside. The heavy, expensive blinds were pulled down so firmly there was not even a microscopic sliver of a gap to peek through. I moved silently to the large sliding glass patio door. I grabbed the handle and gave it a firm pull, but it would not budge a single millimeter. I looked closer, squinting through the morning light, and saw a thick wooden dowel wedged forcefully into the bottom track. It was completely intentionally fortified. This was not a family home anymore. It was a maximum security prison. I kept moving cautiously along the brick siding until I reached the small frosted glass window of the laundry room located at the far back corner of the house. The blind behind this window was also drawn shut, but the pane itself was slightly different. It was an older crank-style window that opened outward. I pressed my face close to the cold glass and tapped gently with my bare knuckles. Just 2 soft, quick knocks. I waited, holding my breath, listening to the pounding of my own heart. Nothing happened. I raised my fist and tapped again, a little louder this time. Suddenly, a dark shadow moved behind the frosted glass. The blind fluttered, moving just a fraction of an inch to the side. A pair of eyes peered out from the narrow opening. My stomach plummeted straight to the ground. It was Chloe, but she looked absolutely nothing like the radiant, cheerful, vibrant woman who had joyfully married my son. Her face was shockingly gaunt, the cheekbones jutting out sharply beneath pale, sickly, translucent skin. Dark, heavy purple bags hung under her terrified eyes, and her beautiful hair was a tangled, unkempt mess pressed against her skull. She looked completely emaciated, like a fragile ghost trapped inside a waking nightmare. When her wild, searching eyes finally recognized my face, they widened in sheer, desperate relief. She pressed her trembling lips together and mouthed the word "Dad" through the thick glass. I gestured urgently for her to crank the window open, but she frantically shook her head from side to side. She pointed down toward the locking mechanism, mouthing that it was broken or jammed shut. I quickly stepped over to the heavy wooden back door located right next to the laundry room. I grabbed the brass knob and twisted it aggressively, but it was locked solid. I looked higher up on the doorframe and felt a surge of rage so violent it nearly blinded me. A heavy-duty industrial padlock had been installed on a brand-new exterior hasp. Andre had literally deadbolted his own wife inside the house from the outside, locking her in like an animal in a cage. Chloe pressed both of her frail hands against the glass, thick tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. She looked so incredibly small, so broken by whatever torment had been happening behind these walls. I forced myself to stay calm, knowing that panic would not save her. I looked around frantically for any possible way to communicate without breaking the glass and triggering an alarm. My eyes landed on the exterior dryer vent, a small, square plastic flap located just a few feet below the laundry window. I pointed down to the vent, gesturing wildly for her to look at it. She followed my finger and understood immediately. She disappeared from the window for a long, agonizing minute. I dropped to my knees in the wet grass, scraping my knuckles against the rough brick as I pried the stiff plastic louvers of the dryer vent open with my bare fingers. The smell of old lint and damp air wafted out. A moment later, a small, pale, trembling hand reached through the dark metal tube from the inside. She pushed a crumpled, severely wrinkled piece of torn notebook paper through the narrow opening. I snatched the paper from the vent as if it were a literal lifeline. I stood up, my old knees popping loudly in the quiet yard, and carefully unfolded the damp, tear-stained page. The handwriting was incredibly shaky, barely legible, written in frantic, jagged strokes by someone whose hands were trembling uncontrollably. I read the words written in blue ink, and every single syllable felt like a rusty blade sliding directly into my chest. There is no foreclosure. He took the money to run away with his mistress. He is forcing me to take pills so he can take full custody of Leo. Please save your grandson. I stood frozen in this damp grass, reading the note a second time, and then a third time until the horrifying, undeniable truth was permanently burned into my brain. The letters blurred together as a wave of absolute devastation washed over me. There was no impending financial ruin. The bank was not coming for the house. There was no tragic, sudden mental breakdown requiring an expensive private clinic. The entire story, the frantic sobbing on the phone, the desperate plea for a father's help, it was all a meticulously calculated, pure, evil lie. My son had looked me in the eye and stolen my life. My hard-earned $86,000, the money I had bled for on the freezing train tracks for 3.5 decades, the money I had saved by denying myself every comfort, was not used to save my family from poverty. It was used to fund my daughter-in-law's physical destruction and my own son's twisted, cowardly escape plan. He had drained my accounts to finance a new life with another woman, while simultaneously poisoning his wife to steal my grandson away from a mother who loved him. I folded the crumpled note very carefully and slid it deep into the inner pocket of my heavy work jacket. I felt the rough texture of the paper resting against my chest, right over my breaking heart. I looked back up at the frosted window. Chloe was standing there, her thin hands pressed flat against the cold glass, weeping silently, trusting me with her life. I stepped forward and placed my large, calloused palm flat against the pane right over hers. I nodded my head slowly, looking directly into her terrified eyes, making a silent, unbreakable promise to her. I was not going to leave her behind. I was not going to let him take my grandson. I turned away from this house and walked back toward the wooden gate. The overwhelming sorrow and confusion that had been suffocating me for the past 24 hours completely evaporated in the morning sun. It was entirely replaced by a cold, hard, and terrifying resolve. I had spent my life working hard, keeping my head down and playing by the rules. I had tried to be a good father to a boy who had ultimately chosen to become a monster. The boy I had raised, the boy I had loved more than my own life, was completely dead to me now. The man who had taken his place was a thief, a liar, and a cruel abuser. I walked back down the quiet suburban street, my heavy boots hitting the concrete with a steady, rhythmic purpose. My $86,000 was gone, but my fight was far from over. I now had to go to war against my own flesh and blood. And I was going to tear down his entire world to protect the innocent people he left trapped inside. The morning sun was already baking the asphalt as I pulled my beat-up Ford truck away from the affluent suburban streets and headed toward downtown Atlanta. The crumpled, tear-stained piece of notebook paper Chloe had slipped through the dryer vent just an hour ago was burning a literal hole in my jacket pocket. I could still feel the phantom sensation of her trembling, icy fingers brushing against my calloused palm through that dark metal tube. Her frantic, jagged handwriting had revealed a truth so ugly that my brain was still violently struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. There was no impending financial ruin. The bank was not coming to seize their beautiful home. My son had looked his own father dead in the eye and fabricated a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated deceit. I needed cold, hard, undeniable facts. A man cannot fight a war based on suspicion and a scribbled note alone. I needed a documented paper trail. I parked my truck in a paid lot near the massive, imposing concrete structure of the county administration building. Before stepping out into the sweltering Georgia humidity, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I had not called in nearly 5 years. Luther Washington. Luther was a tough, grizzled old transport workers' union representative I had known since my earliest days working the freezing freight yards. We had bled on the same steel tracks, fought for the same unfair wages, and shared thousands of cups of bitter midnight coffee. More importantly, Luther was married to Geraldine, a sharp, fiercely intelligent black woman who had worked deep inside the county clerk records department for 3 straight decades. If a piece of property existed in this county, Geraldine knew exactly who owned it, who owed money on it, and what secrets were buried in the fine print. I made the phone call. Luther answered on the 3rd ring, his deep voice booming with surprise and genuine warmth. We exchanged brief pleasantries, the kind old men use to mask the passage of too much time, but I quickly cut straight to the chase. I told him I was standing outside his wife's building and that I needed a massive, quiet favor. Luther did not ask a single probing question. He recognized the heavy, dead, serious tone in my voice. He simply told me to walk up to the 4th floor and ask for Geraldine at the back desk. The interior of the municipal building smelled like stale floor wax, old paper, and endless bureaucracy. I navigated the labyrinth of fluorescent-lit hallways until I found the property records division. Geraldine was waiting for me, behind a tall mahogany counter. She greeted me with a warm, sympathetic smile, noticing the deep lines of exhaustion etched into my face. I handed her a slip of paper with Andre and Chloe's exact suburban address. I asked her to pull the property deed and the complete financial history of the parcel. I told her I needed to know if a foreclosure notice had been officially filed. Geraldine led me into a small, windowless back room filled with humming servers and rows of filing cabinets. We sat down in front of a glowing computer monitor. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing databases that the general public rarely sees. The screen blinked, loading the official legal documents. The truth was laid entirely bare in stark black and white text, carrying the unmistakable seal of the county government. There was absolutely no active foreclosure. There were no missed mortgage payments. There were no outstanding property taxes. In fact, the screen displayed a digital certificate of satisfaction. The sprawling, expensive suburban house had been fully paid off 2 entire years ago. I sat back in the rigid office chair, feeling all the air violently sucked right out of the small room. The story my son had told me while sobbing hysterically on the phone, the story that had prompted me to empty my entire life savings, was an absolute calculated fabrication. He owned the house free and clear. He was not drowning in debt. The physical sensation of a broken heart is not just a metaphor. It is a genuine crushing ache right in the center of your chest, a dull, radiating pain that makes it difficult to draw a complete breath. I thanked Geraldine, my voice coming out as a dry, hollow rasp. I walked out of the municipal building, feeling like a hollow shell of a man carrying a devastating secret that was growing heavier by the minute. But the immaculate real estate records only painted one half of this grotesque picture. I still needed to know exactly where the money went. I needed to know the final destination of my $86,000. I climbed back into the stifling heat of my truck cab and drove directly back to my local bank branch. I walked into the quiet, air-conditioned lobby and immediately sought out the desk of Sarah, the young personal banker who had tried her absolute best to warn me just 24 hours prior. She looked up from her computer, her welcoming smile faltering slightly when she saw the total devastation written across my face. I sat down in the leather chair across from her. I had to swallow my immense pride, the stubborn, foolish pride of an old man who thought he knew his own blood better than a stranger. I looked her in the eye and quietly admitted that she had been completely right. I handed her my driver license and asked her to run a trace on the routing numbers of yesterday's massive wire transfer. Sarah did not say a single word of judgment. She did not offer a condescending lecture. She saw the profound grief of a father and simply began typing. The banking system hummed as she pulled up the international SWIFT data. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see the glowing text for myself. The $86,000 did not go to a reputable medical facility. It did not go to a local mortgage lender or a debt collection agency. The funds had been wired directly into an offshore holding account registered to an anonymous shell company located in Belize. My life savings, the money I had bled for in the freezing rain. The money I had accumulated by denying myself decent clothes, vacations, and comfort was completely gone. It was sitting in a tropical tax haven, patiently waiting to fund my son's cowardly, luxurious escape with his hidden mistress. He had looked his aging father in the eye, weaponized his own wife's fabricated misery, and robbed me blind to finance his infidelity. As I sat there staring blankly at the offshore routing numbers, Sarah cleared her throat softly. She pointed a manicured finger at a different section of the computer screen. Because Andre's primary checking account had been established when he was just 18 years old, it was legally still linked to my master banking profile from his college days. I rarely ever checked his transaction history out of respect for his privacy as an adult man. But Sarah had noticed a glaring, freshly cleared anomaly in his ledger from just 3 days ago. It was a cleared cashier's check for $15,000 made out to a private medical practice under the name of Dr. Montgomery Crane. I asked Sarah to print out a physical copy of that specific transaction. I took the warm sheet of paper from her hands, thanked her for her quiet kindness, and walked back out into the blinding Georgia sunlight. I climbed into the cab of my truck, locked the doors, and pulled out my smartphone. My rough thumbs typed the name Dr. Montgomery Crane into the search engine. The search results that populated my screen turned my blood to absolute ice. The digital footprint of this man was entirely sinister. Dr. Crane was a heavily disgraced private psychiatrist operating on the fringes of the local medical community. He was infamous in specialized legal circles for acting as a highly paid, corrupt expert witness in fiercely contested conservatorship battles and nasty divorce settlements. There were multiple online forums where desperate family members accused him of accepting massive cash payments to rubber-stamp fraudulent psychiatric evaluations, officially declaring perfectly sane people legally incompetent so their wealthy relatives could seize control of their assets. The entire wicked, monstrous puzzle finally snapped together in my mind with terrifying, undeniable clarity. Chloe was a sweet woman, but more importantly, she came from a very affluent family line. I knew she had a substantial, untouchable family trust fund waiting for her. If Andre simply filed for a standard run-of-the-mill divorce to be with his mistress, he would face a brutal, drawn-out legal battle. He would have to split their physical assets, pay massive alimony, and worst of all, he would have to share custody of my precious 5-year-old grandson, Leo. But my son had devised a plan far more sinister and lucrative than a simple divorce. If he bribed a crooked doctor like Montgomery Crane to officially legally declare his wife totally mentally incompetent and a danger to herself, the entire legal landscape shifted in his favor. A judge would grant Andre permanent legal conservatorship over Chloe. That status would give him total, undisputed control over her massive family trust fund. It would automatically grant him full, uncontested custody of my grandson. He could legally lock his innocent wife away in a heavily sedated psychiatric ward, drain her entire inheritance, combine it with the $86,000 he had just stolen from his father, and disappear to a pristine beach in Belize with his mistress. He was literally paying to have his wife legally erased from society. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of the plan physically sickened me. I rolled down the window of my truck and leaned my head out, taking deep, ragged breaths of the humid suburban air to keep from throwing up. The boy I had raised, the little child I had bought baseball mitts for, the son I had proudly watched walk across a college graduation stage, was completely, unequivocally gone. He had been entirely replaced by a calculating, sociopathic monster who was willing to destroy everyone who loved him just to satisfy his own endless greed. I pulled the crumpled, tear-stained note out of my jacket pocket and looked at Chloe's desperate handwriting one last time. Please save your grandson. The profound grief of realizing you have raised a villain is a crushing weight that no father should ever have to bear. I felt a tremendous urge to put my head down on the steering wheel and weep for the innocent boy my son used to be. I wanted to mourn the loss of the proud legacy I thought I had built, but I refused to shed a single tear. Tears were a luxury I could no longer afford. Crying would not save my daughter-in-law from a locked psychiatric ward. Weeping would not protect my grandson from being raised by a ruthless criminal. I swallowed the thick, painful lump in my throat and gripped the worn leather of the steering wheel until my hands ached. The sorrow was completely burned away, leaving behind a furnace of absolute, uncompromising rage. I had spent my entire life playing by the rules, keeping my head down and working hard. Now, I was going to use every ounce of that relentless strength to go to war against my own flesh and blood. The hot Georgia asphalt felt entirely different under my worn truck tires now. Just 24 hours ago, I was a panicked, desperate father, rushing blindly to save my drowning son from financial ruin. Now I was a man actively hunting a dangerous predator. But a predator armed with fraudulent legal paperwork and hiding behind a heavily barricaded suburban fortress is not something a retired railway dispatcher can take down with just bare hands and righteous anger. I knew I could not do this alone. I needed immediate backup. I needed someone who shared my fierce, uncompromising love for the innocent people trapped inside that dark house. I needed Travis. Travis is Chloe's older brother. He is a tough, broad-shouldered white American man who runs a heavy commercial construction crew out in the rapidly expanding northern suburbs of Atlanta. He practically raised Chloe after their parents passed away in a tragic accident many years ago. I always held a deep, unspoken respect for Travis because we cut our teeth in the exact same world of grueling manual labor. He understood the profound value of a dollar earned through blistered palms, sunburned shoulders, and aching muscles. But more than our shared blue-collar background, I knew exactly how fiercely protective he was of his little sister. He loved her with the kind of primal protective instinct that makes a man willing to burn the whole world down to keep his family safe. It took me nearly 45 minutes of driving through heavy metropolitan traffic to track down his current job site. I pulled my old Ford into a massive dirt lot filled with roaring backhoes, idling dump trucks, and towering yellow cranes. The humid summer air was thick with flying red clay dust and the loud metallic clanging of heavy steel beams being dropped into place. I spotted Travis standing near the deep concrete foundation of a half-built commercial plaza. He was wearing a neon yellow high-visibility vest over a sweat-stained gray shirt, a scuffed hard hat pushed back on his head, barking loud orders at a team of concrete workers. When he turned around and saw me walking across the uneven dirt, His rugged face instantly hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated hostility. He held up a hand to pause. His crew wiped the thick sweat from his forehead with the back of a dirty leather glove and marched directly toward me. His heavy steel-toed boots slammed against the dry earth with aggressive, deliberate intent. "Calvin, what in the world are you doing here?" he asked, his voice harsh and grating over the loud roar of the heavy machinery. "I am warning you right now, if you came all the way down here to make excuses for your son and tell me he is just going through a hard time, you can turn your truck around and drive straight back to your side of town." I stood my ground, letting the dry red dust swirl around the cuffs of my jeans. I looked him dead in the eye and asked him when he had last spoken to his sister. Travis scoffed a bitter, angry sound that carried months of unresolved frustration. He told me Andre had completely cut him off from communicating with Chloe. He said every single time he tried to call her phone, Andre intercepted the call, claiming she was resting sedated or having a terrible mental health day. He told me he actually drove over to their house 3 days ago to check on her himself, and Andre had stood on the front porch and threatened to call the police to have him arrested for trespassing. Travis pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at my chest, his bright blue eyes flashing with deep-seated, simmering fury. "Your son is isolating my sister Calvin. He is keeping her locked away behind closed blinds and feeding me a bunch of absolute garbage about a sudden psychiatric breakdown. I know Chloe better than anyone on this earth. She does not have a history of mental illness. She is a wonderful, stable mother. If your boy thinks he can keep me away from my family and treat her like a prisoner, he has another thing coming. I am half a second away from driving my bulldozer right through his pristine living room window and dragging him out by his throat." I did not raise my voice to match his anger. I did not get defensive or try to protect the reputation of the boy I had raised. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my heavy work jacket. I pulled out the crisp official bank receipt showing the massive $86,000 wire transfer from my retirement fund. I handed the paper to him without a single word. Travis snatched the document from my hand, his eyes scanning the staggering numbers printed on the page. He looked up at me, clearly confused and still angry, demanding to know what this financial record was supposed to prove. I kept my voice incredibly calm and steady. I told him my son called me weeping hysterically yesterday morning, claiming their house was in active foreclosure and that Chloe needed extremely expensive inpatient psychiatric therapy that they absolutely could not afford. I told him I drained every single penny of my life savings to save them from living on the street. Travis opened his mouth to yell, probably to tell me I was a gullible old fool for believing a liar, but I raised my hand and stopped him immediately. Then I reached back into my jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled, damp, tear-stained piece of notebook paper. The desperate note Chloe had pushed through the dirty metal dryer vent just a few hours ago. I carefully smoothed out the jagged edges and placed it directly into his large, dusty hands. I stood there in silence and watched Travis read his little sister's frantic, terrified handwriting. I watched this tough, hardened construction boss completely shatter right there in the middle of the loud, chaotic job site. The deep red flush of aggressive anger drained entirely from his face in a matter of seconds, leaving behind a pale, ghostly shock. His lips parted slightly as his eyes scanned the jagged blue ink. "There is no foreclosure. He took the money to run away with his mistress. He is forcing me to take pills so he can take full custody of Leo. Please save your grandson." Travis read the short note 3 times. His massive hands began to shake violently, crumpling the edges of the paper. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat, a devastating sound of pure agony mixing instantly with a terrifying primal rage. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and completely devastated. He asked me if this was real. He asked me if my son was truly poisoning his baby sister. I nodded slowly, letting the grim, horrifying reality settle between us like a heavy iron weight. I told him everything I had witnessed. I told him about the blocked door and the cold, dead look in Andre's eyes. I told him about hearing Chloe crying out for help in the pitch-black darkness of their living room. I told him about my visit to the county clerk office, pulling the public property records and discovering the house was fully paid off. And finally, I told him about the cleared cashier check I found at the bank, the $15,000 bribe paid to a corrupt, disgraced psychiatrist who specialized in fraudulent medical evaluations. The physical transformation in Travis was instantaneous and violently explosive. He ripped his hard hat off his head and threw it viciously into the dirt. He let out a furious, deafening roar of pure rage, grabbing a heavy steel wrench from a nearby tool bench. He completely lost his mind. He declared he was going to murder Andre with his bare hands. He shouted that he was going to drive his truck straight to that suburban house, tear the heavy oak front door off its hinges, drag his sister out of the darkness, and bury my son alive under the concrete foundation of his own driveway. He was breathing heavily, his broad chest heaving, completely consumed by the blind, protective fury of an older brother who had just discovered his sibling was being actively tortured. He turned his back to me and started marching purposefully toward his heavy-duty pickup truck parked near the construction trailers. I stepped directly into his path. I grabbed his thick arm with both of my hands, digging my fingers deeply into his rigid muscles, using every single ounce of physical strength I had built up over 3 decades of moving heavy railway freight. I forced him to stop and look at me. I told him to listen to me very carefully. I told him that if he went to that house right now in a blind, violent rage, he would be sealing Chloe's fate forever, and we would both lose the children we loved. Travis glared at me, the veins bulging in his thick neck, demanding to know why we could not just call the police and kick the front door down immediately. He shouted that kidnapping, abuse, and poisoning were major felonies. He said the cops would arrest Andre on the spot and throw him in a jail cell where he belonged. I shook my head, my heart heavy with the sinister, calculated truth I had uncovered at the bank. I explained the terrifying, brilliant legal trap my son had carefully constructed. I told Travis that we were not dealing with a simple thug. We were dealing with a sociopath who was using the healthcare and legal systems as his personal weapons. I told him about the corrupt Dr. Montgomery Crane. I laid out the brutal, unforgiving reality of the system. I told Travis that if we called the police to that house right now, Andre would not fight them. He would simply open the door wearing the mask of a grieving, exhausted, overwhelmed husband. He would present the responding officers with official medical paperwork signed by a licensed practicing psychiatrist, stating unequivocally that Chloe was suffering from severe, violent, paranoid delusions and was a direct threat to her child. I explained that patrol officers are not medical experts. They are legally bound by official documentation. If a licensed doctor signs a mandate declaring a patient a danger to herself, the police have absolutely no choice but to enforce that medical order. They would not arrest Andre. Instead, they would physically restrain a terrified Chloe, strap her forcefully to an ambulance stretcher, and transport her to a locked psychiatric ward on an involuntary 72-hour mental health hold. Once she was trapped inside the medical system, heavily sedated with antipsychotic drugs, and completely unable to advocate for herself, Andre would execute the final phase of his plan. He would immediately petition a family court judge for emergency legal conservatorship, using the police report and the hospital admission as his ultimate proof. He would gain absolute, undisputed control over her massive family trust fund. He would be granted sole permanent custody of little Leo. He would wire my $86,000 offshore, pack his luxury suitcases, and vanish to a tropical beach with his mistress before the 72-hour mental health hold even expired. I looked deeply into Travis's furious eyes and told him the hardest truth of all. If we attack him right now without absolute proof, Chloe will wake up in a psychiatric hospital, completely stripped of her child, her money, and her freedom. The police will unintentionally act as Andre's private security force. Travis stopped struggling against my grip. The heavy steel wrench slipped from his fingers and dropped into the red clay dirt with a dull thud. The horrifying realization of the trap washed over him, completely extinguishing his blind physical fury and replacing it with a cold, terrifying clarity. He looked at me, his broad shoulders sagging slightly under the immense, crushing weight of the situation. He asked me what we were supposed to do. He asked how we could possibly fight a monster who was successfully using the law to commit the perfect crime. I looked around the loud, dusty construction site, the rhythmic roar of the diesel engines perfectly mirroring the storm raging inside my own chest. I told Travis that 35 years of directing massive freight trains had taught me one fundamental rule about avoiding a catastrophic collision. A heavy train cannot stop on a dime. You have to switch the tracks miles in advance, long before the enemy ever sees you coming. I told him we could not rely on our righteous anger alone. We needed a weapon of our own. We needed undeniable bulletproof video evidence that completely shattered Andre's fabricated medical facade. We needed concrete proof that the husband playing the tragic victim was actually the ruthless predator, and we needed to capture that proof directly from the belly of the beast. I told Travis we had to catch Andre in the absolute act of drugging her against her will and explicitly confessing his escape plan. We had to beat him at his own deceitful game using stealth instead of brute force. Travis wiped his dirty, sweat-stained face, his jaw clenching tightly with absolute, unbreakable resolve. The hostility he had shown me when I first arrived on the job site was completely and permanently gone. We were no longer a defensive white brother and an old black railway worker arguing in the dirt. We were two men united by a shared burning mandate to protect the innocent people we loved with our entire souls. Travis looked at the crumpled note in his hand one last time, folded it carefully, and put it in his pocket. He looked back at me and asked exactly what the plan was. I told him we were going to break into my son's fortress tonight, and we were going to set a trap he would never see coming. The brutal afternoon sun baked the heavy metal roof of Travis's commercial construction truck. We were parked 3 blocks away from my son's house, tucked completely out of sight, behind a thick, towering row of old Georgia pines. The engine was turned off to avoid drawing any attention, and the cabin was quickly turning into a suffocating oven. The air smelled of stale black coffee, dry red clay, and the sour metallic tang of our own nervous sweat. On the dusty center console between us sat 2 tiny black boxes. They were micro-security cameras no bigger than a postage stamp, which Travis had purchased with cash from a specialized electronics store just an hour prior. They were equipped with high-definition lenses, motion sensors, and direct cloud storage feeds. We were sitting in the sweltering heat, staring down the quiet suburban avenue, waiting patiently for the predator to leave his den. I checked my watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. My heart was a heavy, cold stone in my chest. 35 years of managing the chaotic midnight freight trains at the Atlanta rail yards had taught me the vital importance of perfect timing. In my line of work, a single minute of miscalculation meant thousands of tons of steel colliding in the dark. Today, the stakes were infinitely higher. I was not managing trains anymore. I was preparing to derail the life of my only child. At exactly 1 in the afternoon, the sleek silver hood of Andre's luxury sedan slowly backed out of his pristine driveway. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit, looking every bit the successful, respectable corporate executive he pretended to be. He had texted Chloe's phone earlier, a message we intercepted through Travis's shared family cellular plan, claiming he had an urgent, unavoidable business lunch to attend. But Travis and I both knew the sickening truth. He was not meeting clients. He was meeting his mistress to finalize the logistics of their escape. We watched in absolute silence as his shiny car glided down the street and disappeared around the far corner. Travis waited exactly 5 more minutes to ensure the street was completely clear. Then he turned the ignition key. The heavy diesel engine roared to life and we rolled slowly toward the back alley that ran directly behind Andre's property. Travis grabbed a heavy canvas tool bag from the back seat, his jaw set in a rigid, unforgiving line. We approached the tall wooden privacy fence that surrounded the backyard. Travis did not bother looking for a key. He pulled a heavy flathead screwdriver from his bag and popped the heavy metal gate latch open in 2 seconds flat. We slipped quietly onto the perfectly manicured green lawn. The house was equipped with a state-of-the-art smart security system. It was the exact same expensive high-tech alarm system I had proudly helped them pay for when my grandson Leo was born, wanting to make sure my family was protected from the outside world. I never imagined I would be the one breaking into it. But Travis was a master commercial contractor. He built massive corporate plazas for a living and knew exactly how these modern suburban fortresses were wired together. He knelt down beside the main exterior utility box, hidden behind a row of thick azalea bushes. He moved with incredible speed and precision. He unscrewed the plastic cover, pulled out a digital bypass meter, clamped a small set of jumper wires onto the main fiber optic data line, and temporarily scrambled the router signal. The glowing green lights on the back patio security cameras instantly blinked out and went completely dark. The silent alarm monitoring the doors and windows was dead. Travis looked up at me, his blue eyes fierce and focused. He told me we had a maximum of 12 minutes before the central server recognized the signal drop, rebooted the system, and sent an automated intrusion alert directly to my son's smartphone. I pulled my spare brass house key from my pocket. It was the emergency key Andre had given me 3 years ago. Pushing that key into the deadbolt felt like plunging my hand into a freezing grave. The lock clicked, and we stepped silently into the kitchen. The interior of the house was absolutely suffocating. The air was heavy and completely stale, thick with the overwhelming artificial scent of chemical air fresheners, masking the sour smell of unwashed laundry and sheer, undeniable despair. The heavy blackout blinds were pulled down so tight that the spacious, beautiful house I remembered felt like a subterranean tomb. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a cartoon playing from a television down the hall, likely in the locked master bedroom where little Leo was being kept. A sudden, violent urge seized my chest. I wanted to march straight down that hallway, kick the heavy oak door completely off its hinges, scoop up my terrified daughter-in-law and my innocent grandson, and carry them out into the bright sunlight right then and there. My hands actually balled into tight fists, ready to do violence. But Travis grabbed my shoulder, his grip firm and grounding. He shook his head silently. We both knew the brutal reality of the legal trap Andre had laid. If we simply grabbed them and ran right now, we would be committing a felony kidnapping in the eyes of the law. Andre had the forged psychiatric paperwork. He had the corrupt doctor on his payroll. If we triggered a police response without irrefutable proof, the authorities would take Chloe straight to a locked psychiatric ward by nightfall, and we would hand Andre the ultimate victory. You do not derail the train before you clear the tracks. You have to lay the trap perfectly. I forced myself to breathe and focus. My calloused hands were remarkably steady as I reached into my pocket and pulled out the first micro camera. I quietly dragged a wooden dining chair to the center of the kitchen and climbed up. I carefully popped the plastic cover off the ceiling smoke detector, nestled the tiny black camera lens deep inside the wiring cavity, and snapped the cover back into place. From that elevated vantage point, the camera had a perfect, unobstructed bird's-eye view of the entire kitchen, the dining table, and the long hallway leading to the bedrooms. I stepped down and moved swiftly into the darkened living room. I approached the massive wooden bookshelf that lined the far wall. I took the second micro camera and wedged it tightly between the thick spines of two heavy leather-bound encyclopedias. I adjusted the microscopic lens so it pointed directly at the large leather sofa in the center of the room. It was completely invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Travis tapped the face of his watch urgently. 10 minutes had passed. Time was completely up. We wiped down the surfaces we had touched with our sleeves, slipped back out through the kitchen door, and locked the deadbolt securely behind us. Travis removed his jumper wires from the utility box and closed the panel. The smart home system silently rebooted the little green lights on the exterior cameras, blinking back to life, totally unaware of the digital spies we had just planted deep within its heart. We walked back to the truck in total silence, the heavy Georgia heat pressing down on our shoulders. The trap was set. Now we had to endure the agonizing, gut-wrenching wait for the monster to step blindly into it. That evening I sat at the small scratched wooden dining table inside my modest working-class apartment. Travis sat heavily in the chair directly across from me. We had ordered a cheap pepperoni pizza from the place down the street, but the cardboard box sat unopened and growing cold. Neither of us could stomach the thought of eating. My smartphone was propped up against a glass of water in the center of the table, the bright screen providing the only light in the dim, quiet room. The live feed from the two hidden cameras showed the pristine, silent interior of my son's house. The digital timestamp in the bottom corner of the video player read 8:15 at night. The waiting was sheer psychological torture. Every shadow on the screen looked like a threat. Every silent minute felt like an hour. At exactly 8:20, the heavy front door swung open. Andre walked into the frame. He tossed his keys onto the granite kitchen counter with a loud metallic clatter that echoed through my phone speaker. He looked completely relaxed, humming a cheerful, upbeat tune under his breath. He took off his expensive suit jacket, draped it casually over a bar stool, and loosened his silk tie. He walked with the arrogant, unbothered swagger of a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted the entire world. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it slowly, and then walked down the hallway out of the kitchen camera's view. A moment later, he reappeared on the living room camera feed. He was dragging Chloe by her upper arm. Travis and I simultaneously leaned closer to the glowing screen, our breathing stopping completely. Chloe looked so incredibly frail, her oversized pajama shirt hanging loosely off her severely emaciated frame. Her bare feet dragged against the expensive hardwood floor. She was weeping softly, shaking her head from side to side in a desperate, helpless motion. Andre shoved her roughly onto the leather sofa. She collapsed against the cushions like a broken rag doll. The camera hidden in the bookshelf captured every single horrifying detail in crystal-clear, high-definition video. Andre reached into his dress pants pocket and pulled out a small, unmarked orange prescription bottle, the heavy sedatives supplied by his corrupt, bribed doctor. "Take them right now," Andre commanded, his voice dripping with an ugly, sadistic impatience that I had never, ever heard from him before. Chloe sobbed hysterically, pressing both of her thin hands tightly over her mouth. She begged him to stop. Her voice was raspy and broken as she promised she would not say a single word to anyone. She pleaded with him to just let her see little Leo for 5 minutes, swearing she would sign whatever divorce papers he wanted if he would just let her hold her son. Andre did not show a single microscopic ounce of human mercy. He lunged forward. He grabbed her thin wrists with his large left hand, his fingers digging brutally into her fragile skin, and squeezed her jaw open with his right hand. I sat at my dining table and watched my own flesh and blood, the boy I had carried on my shoulders at the county fair. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle physically force heavy mind-altering sedatives down his terrified wife's throat. He clamped his hand tightly over her mouth and tilted her head back, holding her in a vicious grip until she choked, gagged, and was forced to swallow the pills. "You are absolutely crazy, Chloe," he taunted her, leaning in close, his face twisted into an evil, triumphant smirk. "Everyone knows it. My dad knows it. The police know it. Dr. Crane is going to sign the final evaluation papers on Friday morning, and you are going to a padded room for a very, very long time. And the absolute best part is your own family trust fund is paying for all of it." He shoved her shoulders back against the couch cushions with disgust and walked away, leaving her weeping and clutching her stomach in the dark. He walked back into the kitchen, stepping directly into the clear, unobstructed view of the smoke detector camera. He pulled out his cell phone, dialed a number, and put the device on speakerphone while he casually poured himself a heavy glass of expensive bourbon. A woman's voice answered the call. It was bright, cheerful, and sickeningly sweet. "Did you finish packing the house yet?" she asked eagerly. Andre laughed, a deep, relaxed sound, taking a slow sip of his amber drink. "Almost done, babe," he replied smoothly. The old man handed over the 86 grand this morning without asking a single hard question. He is such a gullible, pathetic old fool. The funds are already sitting totally safe in the Belize account. Dr. Crane is coming Friday at 9 in the morning to sign the involuntary commitment hold. Once she is strapped to a gurney and locked in the psych ward, her trust fund automatically defaults to my sole legal control. I have the permanent custody papers for Leo completely ready to file. Our flight out of Atlanta is booked and confirmed for Saturday at noon. We are completely in the clear. The phone call ended. Andre took another sip of his bourbon, completely satisfied with his own monstrous brilliance. The screen on my table continued to glow, showing the villain calmly enjoying his drink, while his wife lay drugged, broken, and weeping, just a few feet away. Travis slammed his heavy construction fists down onto my wooden dining table with such explosive force that the pizza box jumped and the water glass nearly shattered. His broad chest was heaving, his face red with a lethal, uncontrollable intensity. But I did not shout. I did not break anything. The cold, mechanical, highly trained part of my railway dispatcher brain took over, completely silencing the raging storm of a broken father's heart. I looked up at the digital calendar hanging on my kitchen wall. Today was Wednesday night. The corrupt doctor was arriving on Friday morning to steal her away. The flight to Belize was scheduled for Saturday at noon. We had exactly 48 hours to flip the board, burn his wicked empire to the absolute ground, and save my grandson. Thursday morning broke over the sprawling city of Atlanta, with a heavy, suffocating humidity, the kind of thick southern heat that settles deep into your bones before the sun even fully rises. Travis and I had not slept a single minute. We sat opposite each other at my small, scratched dining table, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and the heavy, lingering silence of two men who had just watched pure, unadulterated evil unfold on a glowing smartphone screen. The digital clock on my kitchen counter blinked a neon green 5 in the morning. We had spent the entire night replaying the audio from the hidden cameras, listening over and over to the sickening, muffled sound of my own son physically forcing heavy sedatives down his terrified wife's throat. Every single time I heard Chloe gasping and crying out in the dark, a fresh wave of physical nausea washed over me immediately, followed by an intense burning furnace of absolute outrage. We needed exact details to mount a successful counteroffensive. We needed to know his precise schedule down to the very last minute. I grabbed a pen and a yellow legal pad, the exact same kind I used to carry in my chest pocket to track incoming freight manifests at the rail yard, and began mapping out Andre's timeline. He had bragged to his mistress with the arrogant, bloated confidence of a man who firmly believed he was completely untouchable. I wrote down the crucial pieces of his recorded confession. Friday morning, exactly at 9 o'clock, the disgraced, bribed psychiatrist, Dr. Montgomery Crane, was scheduled to arrive at the suburban house. Andre had paid him a massive $15,000 cash bribe to falsify a severe psychological evaluation. The plan was terrifyingly simple and brutally effective. The corrupt doctor would sign the involuntary mental health commitment papers right there in the living room. They would call a private transport ambulance, strap my frail, heavily drugged daughter-in-law to a medical gurney, and cart her away to a locked psychiatric ward. Once she was legally declared incompetent and stripped of her fundamental human rights, Andre would automatically petition the court for sole emergency conservatorship. He would instantly absorb her massive family trust fund and gain permanent uncontested custody of my innocent 5-year-old grandson Leo. But the most chilling part of his recorded confession was his own personal itinerary. My son was not even planning to be at the house to watch his wife get dragged away into the medical system. He was too cowardly, too entirely focused on the money to physically witness the total destruction he had orchestrated. According to his arrogant bragging over the phone, Andre planned to leave his house at 8:30 on Friday morning. He was heading straight to the main downtown branch of his bank. At exactly 9:30, while his wife was being locked away by men in scrubs. He was going to sit comfortably in a plush leather chair in a pristine air-conditioned office and execute the final international wire transfer. He was going to push the remaining balance of my $86,000 life savings into an untraceable offshore account in Belize. After scrubbing the domestic accounts entirely clean, he would meet his mistress, pack his luxury luggage, and board a first-class flight out of the country by Saturday afternoon. I stared at the yellow notepad, the blue ink spelling out the complete methodical obliteration of my family. I looked across the table at Travis. His broad, muscular shoulders were incredibly tense, his massive construction worker hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles completely white from the immense pressure. We were staring directly down the barrel of a loaded gun, and the trigger was going to be pulled in exactly 24 hours. We could not afford a single microscopic mistake. We could not afford to act on blind, furious emotion. If we went to the local police precinct right now with just a wild story, Andre would deny absolutely everything. He would calmly claim the video simply showed him administering legally prescribed medication to a violently unstable, hallucinating wife. He would successfully muddy the waters with his expensive lawyers and his forged medical documents. We needed to strike with surgical, devastating precision. We needed to fight a simultaneous two-front war, and we needed to win on both battlefields before the clock ran out. I told Travis we had to divide our forces immediately. We could not physically be in two places at once, and both targets required our absolute undivided attention. Travis leaned forward, his bright blue eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering protective fire. He told me he was going to take the electronic evidence, the high-definition video of his sister being physically abused and drugged, and march straight into the county courthouse. He knew several aggressive, no-nonsense family law attorneys from his years running commercial construction crews and dealing with local zoning disputes. He was going to retain the best litigator money could possibly buy, completely bypassing the standard police report protocol. His singular mission was to secure an ex parte emergency hearing with a family court judge the very second the heavy courthouse doors opened on Friday morning. I listened intently as Travis mapped out his side of the battlefield. He was going to present the presiding judge with the raw, unedited, horrifying footage from the hidden camera. He was going to demand an immediate ironclad restraining order against Andre. But much more importantly, he was going to petition for temporary emergency guardianship of both Chloe and little Leo. If the judge signed that emergency order, it would legally paralyze my son. It would completely strip Andre of his marital ability to make any medical decisions for his wife. It would instantly render Dr. Crane's fraudulent psychiatric evaluation entirely useless and legally void. It would build an impenetrable legal wall around my daughter-in-law and my grandson, protecting them from the very system my son was trying to weaponize against them. Travis swore to me, his voice trembling with sheer determination, that he would not leave that courthouse without a signed, stamped mandate from a judge, even if he had to kick down the heavy wooden doors to the judicial chambers to get it. That left the second front of the war entirely to me. While Travis systematically dismantled my son's legal authority, in a courtroom I had to physically intercept the monster himself. I had to stop the international wire transfer, reclaim my stolen life savings, and confront the boy I had raised. I looked down at my rough, calloused palms resting on the table. These were the hands that had built a life from absolute scratch. These were the hands that had bought Andre his first baseball glove, taught him how to tie his shoes, and worked countless double shifts in the freezing winter rain just to pay his college tuition. Now these exact same hands were going to tear down the wicked, luxurious empire he was trying to build on a foundation of lies. I was going to hunt down my own flesh and blood. The sheer breathtaking tragedy of that realization hit me with a profound, suffocating weight. A father's primary biological instinct is always to protect his child from the harsh, unforgiving dangers of the world. For 35 years, I had stood as a solid shield between my son and poverty, hardship, and failure. I had willingly sacrificed my own body, ignoring the arthritis in my knees and the permanent ache in my lower back, to make sure his path in life was clear and safe. But what do you do when your child becomes the terrible danger? What do you do when the boy you loved more than your own life turns into a ruthless, calculating predator? You cannot protect him anymore. You have to protect the innocent people he is actively trying to destroy. You have to become the immovable wall that finally stops him. We spent the rest of Thursday methodically preparing our arsenal for the morning strike. We downloaded the raw video files from the hidden cameras onto 3 separate, highly encrypted flash drives. Travis took 2 of the drives and locked them securely in his heavy metal briefcase. I took the 3rd drive and slipped it into the inner pocket of my heavy work jacket, letting it rest securely against my chest, right next to the crumpled, tear-stained note Chloe had pushed through the dryer vent. We printed out the bank receipts showing my massive withdrawal, the property records Geraldine had pulled for me, confirming there was no foreclosure, and the digital footprint connecting Andre to the disgraced, bribed psychiatrist. We built a towering mountain of undeniable catastrophic evidence. By the time the hot sun began to set on Thursday evening, casting long, fiery orange shadows across the faded linoleum floor of my small apartment, we were fully prepared. Travis stood up from the dining table. He looked incredibly exhausted, the severe stress of the past 2 days, carving deep, dark lines around his mouth and eyes, but his posture was straight, commanding, and totally unyielding. We did not exchange any dramatic, cinematic speeches. We did not need to utter a single profound word. We were 2 hard-working men bound by a singular righteous mission to destroy an abuser. He reached out and grabbed my hand, giving it a firm, solid, bone-crushing shake. He promised me he would have the official court order in his hand by 9 o'clock the next morning. I promised him I would not let Andre send a single dime of that stolen money out of the country. I stood by my small living room window and watched as Travis climbed into the cab of his heavy-duty pickup truck and drove away into the fading southern light. He was heading straight to his attorney's office to spend the entire night preparing the emergency injunction paperwork. I was left completely alone in the quiet apartment. The silence was absolutely deafening, pressing down on my ears like a heavy physical weight. I walked over to the kitchen sink, turned on the faucet, splashed freezing cold water on my face, and stared deeply at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. I saw an old, tired African-American man staring back at me. I saw the thick gray hair in my beard and the deep permanent wrinkles etched around my tired eyes. But I also saw a fierce, unbending resolve that had been forged in the grueling, dangerous fires of the rail yard. I was not a wealthy corporate executive. I did not wear tailored designer suits or sip incredibly expensive bourbon in a pristine living room. But I knew how to endure unimaginable pressure. I knew exactly how to stand my ground when a massive destructive force was hurtling directly toward me. I walked over to the metal hook by the front door and grabbed my worn-out, faded baseball cap. I checked my wristwatch. It was going to be an incredibly long, agonizingly slow night ahead. I had to wait for the hot sun to rise on Friday morning. I had to wait for the clock to finally strike 8:30. I had to wait for my son to walk confidently into his downtown bank, fully believing he had successfully outsmarted the entire world, thoroughly convinced he had discarded his foolish father and permanently destroyed his innocent wife. I reached over and turned off the overhead lights in my apartment, plunging the room into absolute darkness. I sat down heavily in my armchair, staring blankly at the front door, feeling my heart beat a slow, steady rhythm of pure anticipation. The final, desperate race against time had officially begun, and I was fully prepared to run my son completely off the tracks. Friday morning arrived not with a gentle, forgiving sunrise, but with a suffocating, heavy humidity that coated the windshield of my old Ford truck in a thick layer of gray mist. I had the engine idling 3 blocks down from the main suburban avenue, the air conditioner fighting a losing battle against the thick Georgia heat. My cell phone sat securely in the dashboard mount, the screen glowing brightly with an open call to Travis. We had been holding an open line of communication since 6 o'clock in the morning. I could hear the steady, rhythmic breathing of my daughter-in-law's older brother on the other end of the line. Travis was parked a few streets over from my son's pristine suburban fortress, sitting in the passenger seat of an unmarked county sheriff sport utility vehicle. He had done exactly what he promised to do. He had spent the entire night tearing through the bureaucratic red tape of the family court system with a pit bull of a trial attorney. He had shoved the raw, undeniable video footage of Andre physically forcing those heavy sedatives down Chloe's throat, right under the nose of a furious, no-nonsense veteran judge. The magistrate had taken one look at that horrifying hidden camera feed, immediately signed a temporary emergency guardianship mandate, granting Travis full legal custody of Chloe and little Leo, and issued a bench warrant for the immediate detention of anyone attempting to enforce the forged psychiatric commitment. Travis had 2 heavily armed, seasoned sheriff deputies sitting right there beside him, holding ironclad court orders that carried the full, devastating weight of the law. The plan was incredibly delicate. We had to wait patiently for the snake to leave the nest. If we breached the house while Andre was still inside, the situation could easily escalate into a violent, unpredictable hostage standoff. He was a cornered animal, completely desperate to protect his $86,000 escape fund. We needed him out of the house and halfway downtown before the deputies made their move. At exactly 8:30 in the morning, the heavy wooden garage door of the house rolled upward. I held my breath, gripping the worn leather steering wheel with slick, sweaty palms. Through the thick canopy of weeping willow branches, I watched the sleek silver nose of Andre's luxury sedan back out onto the immaculate asphalt. He was right on schedule. The arrogant fool was sticking perfectly to the exact itinerary he had bragged about to his mistress on the hidden camera. I watched him throw the car into drive and cruise down the quiet neighborhood street, completely oblivious to the massive anvil of justice hanging precariously over his head. "He is on the move," I whispered into the phone, my voice low and raspy. "He just turned out of the subdivision, heading south toward the highway. The property is completely clear." "Copy that." Calvin Travis replied, his voice a low, gravelly rumble vibrating with pure adrenaline. "We are rolling in right now." While I put my truck into gear and slowly pulled out of my hiding spot, maintaining a safe, undetected distance from the neighborhood. I was not heading toward the house. My specific mission lay downtown waiting for me inside the polished glass walls of a corporate bank lobby. But I kept the phone line open, listening intensely as Travis and the deputies executed the rescue operation. I needed to hear with my own ears that my grandson was safe before I confronted the monster who shared my last name. Over the speakerphone, I heard the heavy tires of the sheriff vehicle crunching aggressively onto Andre's paved driveway. I heard the car doors slam open, heavy boots hitting the concrete. And then I heard a new, unfamiliar voice. "Excuse me, officers," a man said, his tone slick, oily, and dripping with false professional authority. "Is there a problem here? I am Dr. Montgomery Crane. I am the primary care psychiatrist for the resident of this home, and I am here to execute a standard medical transport for a severely disturbed patient." My blood boiled instantly at the sound of that name. It was the corrupt, disgraced doctor. The man who had accepted a $15,000 cash bribe from my son to permanently erase my daughter-in-law from society. He had arrived exactly at 9 in the morning, just as Andre had arranged. I could picture him standing there in the driveway, clutching a forged clipboard, expecting a smooth, highly profitable morning. I heard the sharp, commanding voice of the lead sheriff deputy cut through the morning air like a cracking whip. "Dr. Montgomery Crane, you need to step away from the front door and place your hands flat on the hood of this vehicle immediately." The slick confidence completely vanished from the doctor's voice, replaced by a high-pitched, stammering panic. "What is the meaning of this? You have absolutely no right to do this. I am a licensed medical professional acting under the legal authority of the husband. You are acting under a suspended license and a completely fraudulent evaluation." Travis barked, his heavy construction boots stomping closer to the microphone. "The judge saw the hidden camera footage last night, Doc. We know exactly what Andre paid you to do. We have the bank trace for the $15,000. You are not transporting anybody anywhere today, except maybe straight to a holding cell in the county jail." I heard the distinct, satisfying metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly shut. The corrupt doctor began weeping, his professional facade completely crumbling, as he begged the deputies to listen to his side of the story, frantically claiming Andre had manipulated him into signing the papers. The deputies ignored his pathetic, sniveling excuses entirely, shoving him roughly into the back of the cruiser. The medical threat was officially neutralized, but the absolute hardest part of the operation was still trapped behind a heavily barricaded wooden door. "Travis," I called out into the phone, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribcage. "Get them out of there. Please go get them out right now. I am on it, Calvin." Travis grunted. The phone audio rustled wildly as he tucked the device into his tactical vest pocket, leaving the line open so I could hear everything. I heard him marching up the 3 wooden steps onto the deep front porch. "Sheriff's Department!" the lead deputy shouted, banging heavily on the thick oak door. "We have a court-ordered mandate to enter the premises. If anyone is inside, step away from the door immediately." There was no answer. Just the heavy, suffocating silence of a house that had been intentionally turned into a suburban prison. "Stand back," the deputy ordered. Over the phone, I heard a massive, splintering crash. It sounded like a cannon firing in the quiet neighborhood. The heavy oak door, the deadbolt, the security chain, everything my son had installed to keep the truth buried in the dark, violently shattered under the sheer, unadulterated force of the police battering ram. The wood cracked and groaned as Travis and the deputies stormed into the foyer. "Sheriff's Department!" The deputies yelled again, their heavy boots thundering across the expensive hardwood floors. I drove my truck onto the highway entrance ramp, merging into the heavy morning traffic, pressing the phone tight against my ear, desperate for any sound of life. For several agonizing seconds, all I heard was the frantic rustling of gear and doors being kicked open down the long hallway. They were clearing the rooms one by one. Then a sound broke through the static that made every single muscle in my aging body completely freeze. It was a high-pitched, terrified wail. It was the sound of a 5-year-old boy who had been locked in a bedroom while his mother was tortured down the hall. Leo Travis yelled, his deep, rough voice suddenly cracking with overwhelming emotion. "Hey, buddy. Hey, it is Uncle Travis. It is okay. You are okay now. I got you, Uncle Travis." The little boy sobbed, his voice echoing through the phone full of sheer, unfiltered panic. "Where is Mommy?" Daddy locked the door from the outside. He said Mommy was sick and I could not come out. I had to pull my truck halfway into the emergency lane on the highway, my vision blurring completely as thick, hot tears streamed down my face. I had promised myself I would not cry until this war was totally won, but hearing my innocent grandson sobbing in the arms of his uncle completely shattered my rigid resolve. I wiped my face fiercely with the back of my hand, swallowing the heavy lump in my throat, forcing myself to merge back into the fast lane. Travis handed the crying boy off to one of the female deputies and continued his frantic search. "Chloe," he shouted, his voice echoing through the massive dark house. "Chloe, where are you?" I heard him push open the door to the master suite. A sudden sharp gasp ripped through the phone speaker. Travis cursed loudly, a string of creative, furious profanities that told me exactly what he had found. Chloe was lying on the master bed, heavily sedated, completely unresponsive, locked in a drug-induced nightmare. Andre had forced a massive dose of pills down her throat the night before, ensuring she would be entirely incapacitated and unable to fight back when the corrupt doctor arrived with the medical transport team. "We need paramedics in here right now," Travis bellowed to the deputies. "She is breathing, but she is completely out. She is burning up with a severe fever. Get the medics in here immediately." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles throbbed with a dull, aching pain. Travis pulled his phone from his vest pocket, bringing it back to his mouth. "Calvin," he breathed heavily, his voice tight and shaking, with a mixture of immense relief and profound horror. "We got them. The kids are safe. Chloe is alive. She is out cold, but she has a strong, steady pulse. The medics are loading her onto a stretcher right now. We are taking them straight to the county hospital to flush those sedatives completely out of her system." Thank God, I whispered, the crushing, suffocating weight of the past 48 hours lifting off my chest in one massive exhaling breath. "Are you absolutely sure Leo is unharmed? He is scared to death." "Calvin, but he does not have a single scratch on him." Travis confirmed the sound of ambulance sirens beginning to wail loudly in the background of the call. "He is sitting safely in the back of the cruiser wrapped in a warm blanket. They are safe. The monster did not win today. We got your family back." A wave of profound, beautiful relief washed over my entire soul. The innocent people I loved were finally permanently out of my son's dangerous reach. The emergency court order Travis carried guaranteed that Andre could never legally approach them again. He could never step foot within 100 yards of his wife or his son without being immediately thrown into a concrete cell. The nightmare of the suburban fortress was officially over, but the war was not won yet. My grandson and my daughter-in-law were safely wrapped in the protective arms of the law. But my entire life savings, the $86,000 I had bled for, on the icy steel rails for 3.5 decades, was currently sitting in a vulnerable holding account. It was entirely in the hands of a traitor who firmly believed he was about to board a flight to tropical paradise. Andre did not know the house had been breached by law enforcement. He did not know his corrupt doctor was sitting in the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs. He did not know that his meticulously crafted sociopathic empire had just violently burned to the ground. He was currently sitting in a pristine air-conditioned bank lobby in downtown Atlanta, casually waiting to execute the final offshore wire transfer that would permanently erase my financial future. I told Travis to stay right by his sister's side at the hospital. I told him to hold my grandson's hand and tell him that his grandfather loved him more than anything in this world. "What are you going to do now, Calvin?" Travis asked, his voice steadying over the phone. "You want me to send a patrol car down to the bank to pick him up?" I looked at the digital clock on my dashboard. It was exactly 9:15 in the morning. My son was 15 minutes away from finalizing his theft. "No," I replied, my voice dropping an entire octave, the warm relief completely hardening into a cold, ruthless, and absolute fury. "Do not send the police. If he sees badges walk through those glass doors, he will know the plan failed, and he will run. I am not going to give him the chance to run. I am going to handle this myself." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I slammed my heavy work boot down onto the gas pedal, pinning it flat against the floorboard. The old diesel engine of my Ford truck roared with a deafening, aggressive mechanical scream surging forward down the interstate. I wove through the heavy morning traffic, my eyes locked directly on the towering glass skyscrapers of the downtown financial district looming in the distance. My son thought he could look his aging father in the eye, weaponize my fierce love for my family, and strip me of everything I had worked my entire life to build. He thought an old retired railway worker was too foolish, too simple, and too trusting to ever see through his brilliant, sophisticated corporate lies. He thought he could bury his wife, steal his child, rob his father, and simply walk away into the sunset. He was about to learn a very brutal, unforgiving lesson about the man who raised him. I was not just a grieving victim. I was the freight train he never saw coming. The heavy glass doors of the towering downtown Atlanta bank slid open with a soft, mechanical whisper. A blast of heavily conditioned, frigid air hit my face instantly, a sharp and shocking contrast to the suffocating, humid summer heat baking the city streets outside. I stepped onto the pristine, polished marble floor. My worn, scuffed steel-toed boots felt completely alien in this quiet sanctuary of wealth and privilege. This was not my world. My world was the freezing midnight rail yards, the deafening screech of freight trains, the smell of diesel fuel, and the honest ache of muscles pushed to their absolute limits. This bank was a sterile fortress of hushed conversations, tailored suits, and invisible digital transactions. But today I was bringing the raw, unfiltered truth of my world straight into the center of theirs. I stood completely still just inside the entrance, letting my eyes adjust to the bright, artificial lighting. I scanned the sprawling, cavernous lobby. It was early and the morning rush had not yet begun. A few tellers stood behind thick glass partitions organizing their stations, and a security guard lingered near the front desk. My gaze swept past the main teller lines and focused entirely on the exclusive glass-walled VIP suites situated at the far end of the building. These were the quiet, private rooms reserved for clients moving massive amounts of money. Clients who required personal managers and discreet transactions. There he was, my son. Andre was sitting comfortably in a plush, high-backed leather chair across from a sharply dressed bank manager. He was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit, his posture completely relaxed, projecting an aura of total superiority and unbothered success. One of his legs was crossed casually over his knee. He was holding an expensive silver pen, casually tapping it against a stack of official transfer documents resting on the polished mahogany desk. He was completely in his element. He looked like the brilliant, successful young executive I had always proudly boasted about to my union brothers down at the yard. I remembered taking him to a small neighborhood bank when he was just 7 years old, holding his tiny hand as he deposited a jar of loose coins into his very first savings account. I had worked double shifts for decades to ensure he could sit in rooms like this, surrounded by opportunity instead of struggle. Now, staring at his broad shoulders through that spotless glass wall, I felt a wave of profound, suffocating grief mix with a cold, terrifying fury. The man sitting in that expensive leather chair was a complete illusion. He was a hollow, sociopathic shell wearing the familiar face of my child. He was casually preparing to push the remaining balance of my $86,000 life savings across the globe to an untraceable offshore account in Belize. He believed he was completely untouchable. He believed his battered, heavily sedated wife was permanently locked away in a psychiatric ward. He believed my innocent grandson was his permanent property. He believed his aging, gullible father was sitting at home weeping over a tragedy that had been entirely fabricated. I tightened my jaw until my teeth ached. I rolled my broad shoulders back, feeling the familiar grounding stiffness in my spine. I did not rush. I did not storm across the lobby like a wild, uncontrollable madman. A man who moves with blind anger gives his enemy precious time to prepare. I walked across the massive expanse of the marble floor with the slow, deliberate, heavy rhythm of an oncoming locomotive. The solid, rhythmic thud of my work boots echoed through the quiet bank, a steady drumbeat of impending justice. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the back of his head as I approached the open doorway of the glass VIP suite. The bank manager looked up from her computer screen. She was an elegant woman with reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Her polite professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw a grim, exhausted older African-American man in a faded work jacket stepping silently into her pristine office. She opened her mouth to speak, to politely ask if I was lost or needed assistance. I raised a single calloused finger to my lips, signaling for absolute silence. The manager paused, her eyes widening slightly, sensing the immense volatile gravity completely altering the atmosphere of her office. Andre was still completely oblivious. He was staring down at his phone, a confident, arrogant smirk playing on his lips, probably reading a message from his mistress about their upcoming luxury flight. He reached out and signed his name with a fluid, practiced stroke on the top document of the stack. He pushed the paper across the desk. I stepped up directly behind his chair. I took a deep, steadying breath, pulling the cold, conditioned air deep into my lungs. Then I raised my right hand and brought it down heavily, planting my massive, calloused palm firmly onto his tailored shoulder. The physical reaction was instantaneous. Andre jolted, as if 1,000 volts of electricity had just ripped through his spine. He gasped, dropping the silver pen onto the mahogany desk with a sharp clatter. He spun around in the leather chair, his eyes wide with sudden, unfiltered alarm. When his gaze collided with mine, the sheer shock practically knocked the breath right out of his lungs. The arrogant color drained completely from his face, leaving behind a pale, chalky mask of absolute terror. For one suspended, agonizing second, the silence in the glass room was deafening. I watched his hyperactive, manipulative brain working at 1,000,000 miles an hour, desperately trying to calculate how his retired father had tracked him down to a downtown banking suite. He was trying to figure out if I was just a worried parent checking in, or if the entire foundation of his monstrous lie had completely caved in. The sociopath inside him took the wheel. He instantly scrambled to repair his shattered facade. The terrible panicked shock in his eyes was forcefully shoved down, replaced by a smooth, deeply practiced fake smile of warm surprise. "Dad," he said, his voice carrying a perfectly manufactured tone of gentle astonishment. "What in the world are you doing down here? How did you even know I was at this branch? Is everything all right? I told you I was handling all the financial logistics for Chloe today. You really should not have driven all the way into the city." He stood up from the leather chair, attempting to bridge the gap between us, reaching out as if to give his grieving father a comforting, reassuring embrace. He was still playing the role of the exhausted, devoted husband, trying to manage a tragic family crisis. I did not say a single word. I did not blink. I simply stood there like a mountain of stone, completely immovable. I looked deeply into his eyes and saw absolutely nothing but hollow, calculating darkness, the utter absence of a human soul. I reached into the front pocket of my jacket. I did not pull out a weapon. I did not raise my fists to strike him, even though every single instinct in my body was screaming for physical retribution. Instead, I slowly withdrew my smartphone. The screen was already unlocked, the media player open, and the volume turned up to the absolute maximum limit. I stepped forward, entirely ignoring my son's outstretched arms. I reached past him and dropped the heavy smartphone squarely onto the very center of the bank manager's polished mahogany desk, right on top of his forged wire transfer documents. I looked down at the glowing screen and pressed play. The high-definition video from the hidden camera positioned inside his living room bookshelf began to roll. The crystal-clear, undeniable reality of his evil instantly shattered the quiet, professional sanctuary of the banking suite. The audio blasted from the phone speaker with a sharp, terrifying clarity. The sound of Chloe sobbing hysterically, begging for her life, pleading to see her 5-year-old son, filled the small glass room. Then came the undeniable, aggressive sound of Andre shouting, "Take them right now!" The bank manager gasped a sharp, horrified intake of air. She pushed her rolling chair violently backward, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in pure, unadulterated shock. She stared at the screen, watching the well-dressed, articulate executive sitting across from her transform into a ruthless, physically abusive monster. The video showed Andre lunging forward on the leather sofa. It clearly showed him violently grabbing his frail, terrified wife by her thin wrists. It showed him brutally forcing her jaw open, shoving the heavy mind-altering sedatives down her throat, holding his large hand tightly over her mouth until she choked and gagged. The audio continued to roll, echoing mercilessly off the glass walls. "You are absolutely crazy, Chloe," my son's recorded voice taunted through the speaker, dripping with vicious, sadistic glee. "Everyone knows it. My dad knows it. Dr. Crane is going to sign the final evaluation papers on Friday morning, and you are going to a padded room for a very long time. And the absolute best part is your own family trust fund is paying for all of it." I did not look at the screen. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my son. The transformation I witnessed in that exact moment was something I will never forget for the rest of my days. The smooth, handsome, perfectly composed mask of the successful corporate businessman literally melted off his skull. The fake smile dissolved into a grotesque, twisted sneer. The blood rushed back into his pale face, turning his skin an ugly, mottled shade of violent crimson. His eyes, normally so charming and bright, darkened into pitch-black pits of cornered feral malice. He looked down at the phone playing his confession, and then he looked back up at me. He finally realized the devastating truth. I was not a gullible, pathetic old fool. I knew everything. I had completely outmaneuvered him. His grand, luxurious escape to Belize was dead. His total control over his wife was dead. His stolen fortune was gone. The trap he had so meticulously built for his innocent family had just violently snapped shut on his own neck. The realization that his empire of lies had been totally decimated by his own father pushed him completely over the edge of sanity. He let out a sudden guttural roar of pure, unhinged fury. It was the sound of a cornered beast realizing it has absolutely no way out. "Shut it off!" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "Shut that damn thing off right now!" He lunged forward with explosive, desperate speed, diving directly across the mahogany desk to grab the phone. He wanted to smash the screen. He wanted to destroy the evidence playing right in front of the horrified bank manager. He swung his arm wildly, knocking over a crystal pen holder and sending a stack of official banking documents flying into the air like white confetti. But I had spent 35 years hauling heavy chains, throwing massive steel switches, and wrestling with rusted iron. I was older, my knees ached, and my hair was gray, but I still possessed the raw, undeniable physical power of a man who worked with his hands every single day of his life. As Andre dove across the desk, I stepped forward and intercepted him. I caught him squarely by the lapels of his expensive custom suit. I dug my thick fingers deep into the fine fabric, twisted my grip tight, and used his own reckless forward momentum completely against him. I hauled him backward with a violent bone-jarring heave, yanking him entirely off his feet. I slammed him incredibly hard against the thick glass wall of the VIP suite. The heavy glass shuddered violently under the massive impact, a loud cracking boom echoing all the way out into the main banking lobby. The wind was completely knocked out of his lungs. He gasped, his eyes going wide with sudden pain and total shock. He tried to swing a wild, desperate fist at my face, thrashing against my hold. But I stepped in close, pinning him securely against the glass with my broad chest. I pressed my forearm firmly against his collarbone, locking him in place with the unstoppable, immovable force of a father who had just rescued his family from a monster. The video on the desk continued to play loudly, transitioning to the moment Andre walked into the kitchen and made the phone call to his mistress. The bank manager was standing pressed against the far wall of her office, her hands shaking as she grabbed her desk phone and frantically dialed for security. Out in the main lobby bank, tellers were pointing, and the armed security guard was already sprinting across the marble floor toward the glass suite. Andre thrashed wildly against me, his face contorted in absolute rage, his expensive suit tearing at the seams. "You ruined everything." He hissed, his voice a venomous, desperate snarl right near my ear. "You ruined my life." I leaned my face in close to his. I looked directly into the terrified, defeated eyes of the criminal I had birthed into this world. The profound, heartbreaking sorrow I felt was completely eclipsed by the cold, hard steel of final justice. "No," I whispered, my voice completely devoid of any remaining paternal warmth. "You ruined your own life." I just finally switched the tracks. The security guard burst through the open doorway of the office, his hand resting heavily on his utility belt. He yelled for everyone to freeze. I did not resist the guard. I did not say another word to my son. I slowly released my iron grip on his torn suit lapels and took a deliberate step backward, allowing the heavy weight of the law to finally step in and completely consume him. The hidden camera footage on the desk reached its final damning conclusion. The sound of Andres' own arrogant voice bragging about his stolen money faded into the quiet, heavily conditioned air of the bank. The war was officially over. I stood tall in the center of the shattered room, breathing deeply, for the first time in 3 days, knowing that my $86,000 was finally safe, but more importantly, knowing that my grandson would never have to look into the eyes of this monster ever again. The heavy polished glass walls of the VIP suite seemed to vibrate from the sheer concussive force of the physical confrontation. I had just released my iron grip on Andre, stepping backward, and letting the freezing cold reality of the situation finally crash down upon his shoulders. I am Calvin Thurman, a 62-year-old retired railway dispatcher who spent his entire life breaking his back on the midnight freight lines to build a perfect life for his only son. But standing there in that pristine bank lobby, watching the boy, I raised bare his teeth like a cornered animal. I knew the ultimate sacrifice of my life was not bleeding for him. It was stopping him. The armed bank security guard did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He charged straight through the open doorway, his thick hands shooting out to grab my son by the lapels of his ruined custom-tailored suit. Andre was completely blinded by a toxic, volatile mixture of absolute shock, public humiliation, and unhinged fury. Instead of surrendering to the inevitable consequences of his own monstrous greed, he made the absolute worst decision of his life. He tried to physically shove the uniformed guard away, twisting his body and letting out a feral, desperate shout that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings of the financial institution. That singular movement was all the justification the guard needed. He swept Andre's legs out from under him with a swift, highly trained, and merciless motion. My son hit the spotless marble floor of the bank lobby with a loud, sickening thud that sent a visible shudder through the entire building. A second security officer rushed in from the main teller line, diving onto the ground to assist his partner. Together they pinned Andre face down against the freezing polished stone. The sharp crack of his expensive designer watch smashing against the marble echoed loudly in my ears. He thrashed like a wild beast caught in a heavy steel trap, kicking his legs and screaming desperate, breathless obscenities that made the elegant bank manager cover her ears in absolute horror. I stood completely still, my breathing slow and measured, watching the boy I had lovingly carried on my shoulders at the county fair being physically subdued on the floor. A profound, suffocating sorrow briefly washed over my heart, the natural, agonizing grief of an aging African-American father, watching his own flesh and blood fall to the absolute bottom of human decency. But I immediately swallowed that pain, locking it away deep within my chest. He had chosen this dark path. He had chosen to be a predator. He had chosen to torture his innocent wife and attempt to steal his own child. Before Andre could even manage to catch his breath and form a coherent sentence, the high-pitched, piercing wail of police sirens shattered the quiet downtown morning atmosphere outside the bank. I had not walked into this corporate building relying on blind luck or emotional impulse. Right before I stepped out of my beat-up old Ford truck, I had dialed the local precinct, informed them of an active, massive financial crime, and explicitly told them that a violent domestic abuser with outstanding emergency family court warrants was currently attempting to wire stolen funds out of the country. Through the towering floor-to-ceiling windows of the bank lobby, I watched 3 county sheriff cruisers come tearing to a violent halt right at the front curb. The bright red and blue emergency lights spun wildly, casting harsh, frantic reflections across the pristine glass and illuminating my son's panicked, sweating face as he lay pinned against the floor. 4 heavily armed deputies burst through the sliding automatic doors, their heavy boots moving with immediate, unyielding tactical purpose. They marched directly past the terrified patrons and stunned tellers, heading straight for the VIP suite. The bank security guards quickly stepped back, handing the physical control of the situation entirely over to the sworn officers of the law. Andre was roughly hauled to his feet by 2 large deputies. His custom charcoal suit was severely wrinkled and torn, his expensive silk tie hanging loosely and pathetically around his neck. His face was scraped raw from the hard marble, completely devoid of the arrogant, wealthy businessman persona he had worn just 10 minutes prior. The lead deputy grabbed his arms, twisting them securely behind his back, and the sharp, undeniable metallic click of police handcuffs ratcheting tightly shut echoed through the silent bank. It was the sound of ultimate, irreversible finality. Andre Thorne, the deputy, announced, his voice booming with undeniable authority, so that every single person in the lobby could hear him perfectly. "You are being placed under official arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Andre struggled helplessly against the heavy steel cuffs, his eyes darting frantically around the room until they finally locked onto mine. He looked at me with a pathetic, desperate mixture of hatred and begging, expecting his father to magically intervene and save him from the consequences of his actions, just like I had done so many times during his childhood. But I did not move a single muscle to help him. I simply stared back at him with the cold, unyielding judgment of a man who had finally drawn a permanent line in the sand. The deputy continued listing the charges, each one landing like a heavy physical blow to my son's fragile ego. "You are being officially charged with severe domestic battery and unlawful imprisonment. You are also being charged with felony wire fraud and the elder financial abuse of your own father. We have received an emergency bench warrant from the family court regarding the immediate safety of your wife and child. You are going away for a very long time." The explicit mention of elder financial abuse made Andre flinch violently. He finally understood that his perfect, victimless crime had completely blown up in his face. He had tried to steal a retired railway worker's entire life savings, assuming I would be too old, too ignorant, and too trusting to track the complex digital money trail. He was entirely wrong. As the deputies began to physically march him out of the VIP suite and toward the main entrance, something outside the large glass windows caught my eye. A bright red luxury sports car was idling illegally at the curb, just a few feet behind the flashing police cruisers. Sitting in the driver's seat was a beautiful, heavily made-up younger woman wearing oversized designer sunglasses. It was his hidden mistress. She had clearly been waiting for him to finish the offshore transfer so they could head straight to the international airport and board their luxury flight to Belize. Andre saw the red car through the glass doors. A sudden, desperate spark of hope flared in his erratic eyes. He yelled her name, a pathetic, screaming plea for rescue, practically dragging the heavy deputies forward as he desperately tried to reach the exit. The woman in the red car slowly lowered her designer sunglasses, peering through her tinted windshield at the chaotic scene unfolding inside the bank lobby. She saw the flashing blue lights. She saw the heavy steel handcuffs binding Andres' wrists behind his back. She saw the furious, unyielding expressions of the arresting officers. In that singular, defining moment, the true, hollow nature of their toxic relationship was laid completely bare. There was no loyalty among thieves. There was no deep, enduring love waiting to overcome adversity. There was only cold, calculating self-preservation. She made direct eye contact with Andre for one brief, incredibly silent second. Then she calmly raised her sunglasses back over her eyes, threw the luxury sports car into reverse, and slammed her foot onto the gas pedal. The tires squealed loudly against the hot asphalt as she sped backward, expertly maneuvered around a parked delivery truck, and completely vanished down the busy downtown avenue. She left him entirely alone to face the total destruction of his life. The devastating reality of his ultimate abandonment hit Andre with the immense force of a speeding freight train. His legs gave out entirely beneath him. He collapsed onto his knees right there in the middle of the main bank entrance, ignoring the firm grip of the deputies trying to hold him upright. He began to scream a loud, guttural, pathetic wailing that echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings of the financial institution. He was sobbing uncontrollably, begging the officers to let him go, begging his mistress to come back, begging his father to please help him fix this mistake. I stood completely still, watching the absolute destruction of a monster. I did not feel a single microscopic ounce of pity. He was finally reaping the exact bitter harvest he had so maliciously sown. The deputies hauled him forcefully back to his feet, completely ignoring his hysterical, pathetic tears, and shoved him roughly into the back of a waiting squad car. The heavy doors of the police cruiser slammed shut, completely severing Andre from the free world. I watched the vehicles pull away from the curb, their sirens wailing into the distance, until they disappeared completely from sight. A profound, heavy silence settled over the bank lobby, broken only by the quiet whispers of the shocked patrons. I turned my attention back to the elegant bank manager still standing inside the VIP suite. She was physically trembling, her face entirely pale, having just witnessed a wealthy client being unmasked as a violent, deceitful criminal. I walked slowly back into the office, my heavy boots thudding against the marble. I picked up my smartphone from her desk, tapped the screen to close the horrifying video, and slipped the device safely back into my jacket pocket. "I sincerely apologize for bringing this kind of trouble into your workplace today," I said, keeping my voice incredibly gentle and reassuring to calm her frayed nerves. "But as you can clearly see, that man was attempting to steal everything I own to fund a criminal escape. I need to know the exact status of the $86,000 he just tried to wire to Belize." The manager swallowed hard, taking a deep, shuddering breath to compose herself. She sat back down in her rolling chair, her hands shaking slightly, as she reached for her computer mouse. She rapidly clicked through the open banking windows, pulling up the international transfer protocol Andre had just signed. "The international wire was initiated," she said, her voice wavering slightly, before settling into a professional tone. "But the network imposes a mandatory holding period for fraud prevention on any sudden transfer exceeding $50,000. The funds have not left the domestic clearinghouse yet. Given the direct visual evidence of elder financial abuse I just witnessed, and the immediate police arrest that occurred in my lobby, I am utilizing my executive authority to instantly flag this transaction as highly fraudulent." I watched intently as her fingers flew across the keyboard. A bright red notification popped up on her monitor. She hit a few more keys, entered a complex administrative override password, and clicked a final button. The screen refreshed instantly. "I have officially frozen the offshore wire transfer," she announced, looking up at me with a genuine, relieved smile. "The entire $86,000 has been completely reversed and is being deposited directly back into your primary retirement account as we speak. Every single cent is safe." A tremendous, overwhelming wave of pure relief washed over my entire body, so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. The suffocating, crushing weight that had been sitting squarely on my chest for the past 48 hours instantly evaporated into thin air. My life savings, the money I had literally bled for in the freezing winter rain, the security net I had built through decades of grueling manual labor, was finally safe. My son had not broken me. He had not stolen my future. I thanked the bank manager with profound, genuine gratitude, shaking her hand firmly before turning to leave the glass suite. I walked out of the towering bank and stepped into the blazing Georgia sunlight. The humid air no longer felt oppressive. It felt warm, clean, and incredibly breathable. I walked back to my beat-up old Ford truck, climbed into the familiar worn leather seat, and started the heavy diesel engine. I did not drive back to my empty apartment. I drove straight toward the county hospital. So, when I finally walked into the quiet recovery room, the sight that greeted me instantly healed every single broken piece of my heart. Chloe was sitting up in a hospital bed, looking pale and exhausted, but entirely free from the heavy sedatives. Her beautiful eyes were bright and incredibly clear. Sitting right there on the bed beside her, tightly wrapped in his mother's loving arms, was my 5-year-old grandson, Leo. Travis was standing tall by the window, keeping a watchful, protective eye over his family. When little Leo saw me walk through the doorway, his face lit up with pure joy. He scrambled off the bed, ran across the linoleum floor, and threw his small arms tightly around my legs. I knelt down, wrapping my big calloused hands around his tiny shoulders, holding him close and breathing in the sweet scent of his hair. We had won. The innocent people were safe, the money was recovered, and the monster was permanently caged in a concrete cell. For 35 years, I worked the heavy freight lines, moving thousands of tons of steel through the darkest nights. I always believed that providing financially was the ultimate measure of a good father. But this terrifying nightmare taught me a much deeper, more profound truth. Being a true protector is not just about putting food on the table or paying for an expensive house. True fatherhood means having the absolute courage to stand up and fight, even when the enemy wears the face of your own child. It means looking evil dead in the eye and refusing to back down, no matter how much it breaks your own heart. Sometimes protecting your family means you have to be the one to tear down the very walls you helped build. Thank you so much for sitting with me and listening to my story today. If you found any value, any strength, or any truth in what I went through to protect my daughter-in-law and my grandson, please hit that like button to bring a little sunshine and solidarity to this old working man's heart. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss the real, unfiltered life stories we share here. And please tell me in the comments exactly what city or country you are watching from and what time it is there right now. It brings me immense joy to know just how far these stories travel and to connect with good, honest folks from all around the world. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never stop fighting for the people you love. With all my heart, respect, and love to you all. See you in the next story. 6 months have passed since that explosive morning inside the downtown Atlanta bank lobby. It is truly remarkable how quickly the earth continues to spin, even after your entire personal universe has been completely shattered and rebuilt from the ground up. Today, the crisp autumn breeze is blowing through the tall Georgia pines outside my apartment window, replacing the suffocating summer heat that once mirrored the sheer panic in my chest. I wake up these days long before the sun ever rises, not because my old joints are screaming from the freezing rail yard, or because my mind is plagued with terrible anxiety about my son's fabricated financial ruin, but simply because I genuinely want to sit in the quiet morning light and enjoy the absolute peace I fought so incredibly hard to secure. My $86,000 was safely returned to my retirement account within a matter of days following the arrest. That money represents 35 grueling years of my blood, sweat, and tears on the midnight freight lines. Knowing it is secure brings a profound sense of physical relief. But the true wealth I gained from this living nightmare has absolutely nothing to do with bank statements or digital numbers on a screen. The real victory is the quiet, undeniable dignity of knowing I did not look the other way when pure evil was staring me right in the face. The justice system moved with a swift and heavy hand once the truth was dragged completely into the light. Andre is currently serving an 8-year sentence in a state penitentiary. The trial was a grueling, agonizing process of tearing away every single layer of his deceitful, arrogant mask. He tried his best to hire aggressive defense attorneys to twist the narrative. He tried to spin a tragic story, blaming everyone else for his actions. He even tried to claim he was under immense psychological stress from his corporate job and his marriage. But the raw, unedited, hidden camera footage does not lie, and it certainly does not feel pity. The judge watched my son physically force heavy sedatives down his terrified wife's throat. She heard his arrogant bragging over the phone to his mistress about stealing my life savings and locking Chloe away in a dark psychiatric ward. There was no leniency offered, and absolutely no mercy given. I sat firmly in the front row of the courtroom on the day of his final sentencing, wearing my best Sunday suit. When the judge brought down the heavy wooden gavel and pronounced those 8 long years, my son turned to look at me one final time. He was wearing an Orange County jumpsuit, his wrists were shackled securely to his waist, and his eyes were completely hollow. I did not shed a single tear for him. I had already spent an entire lifetime mourning the innocent little boy he used to be. The man standing in heavy iron chains before the judge was a dangerous, calculating stranger who had chosen endless greed over basic human decency. I simply nodded my head at him, accepting the harsh reality that sometimes the only way to save a corrupt soul is to let them face the absolute destruction of their own making. He made his terrible choices, and now he has thousands of lonely days in a tiny concrete cell to think about the beautiful family he threw away for nothing. While Andre faces the cold, brutal reality of a prison block, Chloe has experienced a beautiful, miraculous resurrection. The first few weeks after the rescue operation were incredibly difficult. She had to be slowly and carefully weaned off the heavy psychiatric sedatives that the corrupt, bribed doctor had pumped into her delicate system. Her body was frail, her spirit was badly bruised, and the profound psychological trauma of being betrayed by the man she loved took a tremendous emotional toll. But Chloe is a fierce, unstoppable survivor. With her older brother Travis standing firmly by her side like an impenetrable brick wall, she fought her way back into the warm light. The emergency family court immediately stripped Andre of all his marital rights and granted Chloe full permanent and uncontested legal custody of my sweet 5-year-old grandson Leo. She also regained total control of her massive family trust fund, completely securing her financial independence for the rest of her life. Today, the dark purple bags under her eyes are completely gone. Her cheeks are full and glowing with radiant health, and her beautiful warm smile has finally returned. She moved out of that dark suburban fortress and bought a wonderful, bright, spacious home in a quiet neighborhood where the large windows are always wide open to let the natural sunshine pour freely inside. I lost a toxic son, but the good Lord saw fit to bless me with a true loving family in return. Every single Sunday afternoon, without fail, Chloe, Travis, and little Leo come over to my house for a massive, traditional Southern barbecue. I spend my entire Saturday night carefully marinating thick cuts of pork ribs, mixing up my special mustard potato salad, and slow cooking a huge pot of fresh collard greens with smoked turkey wings, just the exact way my own grandmother taught me decades ago. When Sunday afternoon finally rolls around, my small grassy backyard is absolutely filled with the sweetest sounds on this entire earth. I stand proudly over the hot, smoking charcoal grill, flipping the ribs and listening to the beautiful, chaotic rhythm of true human joy. Travis is always out there, on the green grass, running around and tossing a leather football with Leo completely covered in dirt and laughing at the absolute top of his lungs. Chloe usually sits in the cool shade of the patio, sipping a tall glass of iced sweet tea, chatting with me about her new interior design projects, and sharing hilarious stories about Leo's latest adventures in his kindergarten class. When little Leo spots me checking the hot grill, he drops his football and runs across the yard, with his little arms stretched wide open. He wraps his small hands tightly around my knees and looks up at me with those big, bright, innocent eyes, shouting that he is absolutely starving and asking if his granddaddy has the barbecue ribs ready yet. I look down at that sweet, energetic boy, and my heart swells with a protective, fierce love so incredibly powerful, it literally takes my breath away. He does not live in paralyzing fear anymore. He does not have to hide in a locked, dark bedroom while a monster roams the hallways. He is growing up surrounded by strong people who will move heaven and earth to keep him safe. When we all finally sit down around the big wooden picnic table, Travis bows his head and says the grace. He thanks the Lord for the delicious food, for the safety and health of his sister, and for the unbreakable bond that brought us all together. Travis and I are from completely different worlds. He is a tough white construction boss, and I am a retired black railway dispatcher. But sitting at that table, passing the warm cornbread and sharing a meal, we are closer than biological blood brothers. We are a family forged in the incredibly hot, dangerous fires of adversity. Looking back on this entire terrifying ordeal, I realize that life has a very strange and painful way of teaching you its most valuable lessons. For 35 years, I broke my back on the midnight freight lines, working exhausting double shifts in the freezing winter rain and the blistering summer heat. I did it all because I deeply believed that providing a thick financial safety net was the ultimate measure of a good, righteous father. I thought that if I could just give my son enough money, enough security, and enough opportunity, he would automatically grow into a righteous, honorable man. I was completely blind to the dark rot growing inside his soul, because my love for him acted like a thick, heavy veil over my eyes. It is the hardest thing in the entire world for a loving parent to admit that their child is capable of pure, calculated evil. We want to desperately justify their bad behavior. We want to make endless, enabling excuses. We want to believe that if we just love them a little bit harder, or give them a little bit more money, they will suddenly see the glorious light and change their destructive ways. But you absolutely cannot purchase a moral compass for someone who completely refuses to carry one. You cannot love the toxic greed out of a person who values paper money more than human life. When I stood on that concrete suburban porch and looked directly into my son's cold, calculating eyes, I had to make the most agonizing choice a father can ever possibly face. I had to rip the protective blindfold off my own face and accept the brutal, ugly reality of the situation. I had to stop fiercely protecting the innocent boy I wished he was, and start ruthlessly fighting the abusive monster he had actually become. If I had turned a blind eye to his obvious lies, if I had let my stubborn parental pride convince me to walk away from that locked front door, Chloe would be buried alive in a heavily sedated psychiatric ward right now, and Leo would be entirely in the clutches of a sociopath. I had to completely shatter my own fragile heart in order to save their innocent lives. To all the devoted parents, loving grandparents, and hardworking, honest folks listening to my voice today, I want to share a profound piece of wisdom earned through the absolute hardest kind of emotional pain. Love should never ever mean turning a blind eye to the truth. Real love requires incredible, unwavering courage. It requires the immense bravery to look closely at the people closest to you and hold them strictly accountable for their terrible actions. If your gut intuition is screaming loudly that something is fundamentally wrong, you must trust it unconditionally. 35 years on the noisy railroad taught me to feel the dangerous, deadly vibration of an oncoming freight train long before it ever rounds the bend. Your soul has that exact same brilliant warning system built right in. When you feel that deep, unsettling danger echoing in your bones, do not ignore it just to keep the artificial peace. You have to stand up tall and protect the innocent, vulnerable people, even if it means standing in direct, aggressive opposition to your own flesh and blood. Integrity matters so much more than shared human DNA. A shared last name does not automatically grant someone the permanent right to manipulate, abuse, or steal from you. Family is not just the random people you happen to be biologically related to by birth. True family is the people who stand fiercely and loyally by your side when the absolute darkest storms of life aggressively roll in. Family is the people who respect your endless sacrifices, honor your personal boundaries, and treat your fragile heart with genuine protective care. Travis and Chloe are my true, authentic family now. We certainly did not start out that way, but we earned each other's deep love and absolute trust on the brutal battlefield of life. We fought the suffocating darkness together, hand in hand, and we walked out into the beautiful bright light, holding each other's hands. If my story gave you enduring strength today, if it opened your eyes to the harsh, terrifying realities of elder financial abuse, or if it simply reminded you to always trust your gut. Intuition, lose, hit that like button right now to support an old, grateful father's heart. It means the absolute world to me to share these hard, difficult truths with you all. Please subscribe to the channel right now so you do not ever miss the next real-life story I have to tell. We have a beautiful, strongly growing community here, and I genuinely want you to be a permanent, active part of it. And please do me a wonderful favor and tell me down in the comments what exact city or country you are watching this video from and what exact time it is there right now. It brings my heavy heart so much profound, incredible joy to know exactly where my brothers and sisters are tuning in from across this great country and all around the entire world. Knowing that my personal pain might help protect another innocent family somewhere out there makes every single tear I shed completely worth it. Stay incredibly safe out there. Always stay vigilant to the truth, and may God bless you and your loved ones forever. See you in the next story.